Hello and welcome to Fiddler's Green, episode number 70, Fragments. So, indeed, this is a makeup stream from last week. Last week, I was busy with a lot of work from my day job and also preparing to give a speech for the Redwood Society. That's a fraternal organization in California. We had our inaugural dinner this last Saturday, and I think it was a big success. The we got was actually too small, and so we sold out really early. And it only went on for 3 hours, which is, I think, way too short for an event like that. So, but no, it was a really good proof that there is a lot of interest in the types of organizing that we're trying to do. So, I mean, I think it was one kind of I don't know, white pill. I've in the last few months, I've been thinking a lot about larger questions concerning politics and what this is all for, what we're trying to achieve on the internet. I think I'm not alone in doing this. This is sort of the subject of the talk today is really trying to come to some kind of conclusion about what we're doing here. Obviously, there's politics, and politics is eternal and they're ever present. But I don't think I'm the only person who looks around at the kind of fruits that people get oftentimes in the internet and then kind of wonder, what is it all for? What is actually going to happen? And what are we actually moving towards? Because all of the typical forms of the internet that we've had are kind of falling away. I mean, what's happened in the last? I mean, we've been usually do these every 2 weeks, and this has now been 3 weeks this time. So in the process of these last 3 weeks, I think the main headlines have been the things concerning the Minneapolis shooting, ongoing dramas online with people splitting ideological factions and whatnot. I mean, that's basically been it, right? It's basically been we've relitigated and relitigated and relitigated all of these battles. And we're sitting at 3 weeks from the last podcast, not two, and it's more or less just the same things over again, right? It's more or less the same controversies. They're still doing ICE raids in Minneapolis. There's still a showdown between the broad Democrat coalition, the mainstream American government, and the Trump administration. Trump hasn't completely backed down, but at the same time, he hasn't made the kind of inroads that I think he really wanted to show that he maintained control over the city itself. And the fact that it's so difficult to actually enforce those mandates in Minneapolis in winter, it really calls into question whether a similar effort would be successful in California in the summertime. Now, all this is, I mean, I think that some of this is largely overblown, but I think the question everyone has on their minds, and this is one reason why it was so good to get out. I do this periodically, but it's so good to have another event and see people and hear their concerns more locally, because there's just no getting around the fact that the shadow that's looming over all of these conversations, it's not just the political situation. It's the way that we relate to online media that's fundamentally changing. Like, everyone knows that this is changing. Everyone knows that people are expecting things that are different and that they can't expect the same things that they originally looked to get from the internet. And it's been 10 years since I've started now officially, this is, February of 2016 was when I started my channel. And it was no longer a blog. I had done a few videos on the irregular, I did this blog back in the day called The Data Distributist because I was a data science guy and also I was interested in Catholic distributism. And then I did a variety of debates with atheists on some topics, and these were videos that got uploaded to the channel. It wasn't very serious. February of 2016 was when I started my channel. And by that time, I had already been on the internet or on social media for 10 years, because social media, people don't remember this. Social media started up properly in 2006. Social media wasn't really a thing before then. There was MySpace, there was Craigslist. These things were not real social media. They were not the kind of mediators that we have today. People didn't build profiles. The people who got famous online were usually people who were already famous or were doing things that had classically made people famous. And it was very much a different phenomenon. So, when we think about it, you could even go back further, right? You could say that I started using the internet in 1996. I started using social media in 2006. I started my social media account in 2016. Again, properly. I'd done minor blogging before that. And now here I am 10 years after that trying to figure out exactly where this has all come. I'm not going to comment on the old internet. I will say that I have a certain fondness for the social media that existed before 2006. The kind of people, every now and again, you hear these videos from the past, Chocolate Rain, The Ultimate Battle of the Ultimate Destiny, a variety of these. Homestar Runner, that was also a pre-social media age internet phenomenon. These guys, they did this whole kind of cartoon series with flash animation, like roughly at the same humor level as you'd have from something like Muppets, but it's flash animation. I still have a huge fond, I have a very soft spot in my heart for all those old internet animations, and it was a very novel time in the pre-social media internet. It was very cozy. Video games were at their height. Music had, notably declined from the 90s for a period, but there was in the background this amazing hipster music scene. And I have a whole huge article going out about that if I ever get a chance to put the finishing touches on it. But it was, so it was that actually kind of made it better, right? Because although no one had really done anything that was huge in music since the alternative waves of the 1990s, there was this indie scene for music. So you could get online and you could find all of these amazing little diamonds in the rough, like Elliott Smith and the Decemberists and all these these little gems, and you could download them and develop all these eclectic music tastes, and you'd have like the playlist, or you burn CDs or whatever. This is the pre-social media internet. And all the videos were kind of gems. People would download videos onto their hard drive and they'd share them. And then you do LAN parties to share various things. And it was really, really cool. It was very local. It was very garage era internet. The social world still existed predominantly in the real life, in real life. And then the internet was this little kind of toy you had on the side that was for very eclectic topics. Nothing emerged from the internet. It was all uploaded to the internet and shared on the internet. And it was a little bit of a bell and whistle to your social life. Then, of course, we have the social media age. And again, I feel like I have to explain what social media was initially. So there were things like MySpace and Craigslist. These were not real social media. MySpace and Craigslist were not real social media. These were novelty websites that previewed what social media would be like. If you wanted to buy something, you'd get on Craigslist. I even arranged like a date on Craigslist. Like if you did that now, you'd be looking for prostitution. But I used to answer Craigslist personals, like when I was in college. This is ages ago. But that's exactly what Craigslist was for. People just posted wants on Craigslist, and then you'd answer them. It was basically just a giant forum for that. There's no social media aspect about it. MySpace was just essentially a website creator for your own personal homepage. Very notably, back in the day, MySpace, this probably killed it actually. They let users upload like songs to their homepage. So when you clicked on the MySpace homepage, the song would play, like your anthem. This is when people really associated with their musical tastes. And so, but it made the website totally unusable because you'd log on to check to see how someone was doing on their vacation. You need to get a Rage Against the Machine song played. It was totally unusable. The first proper social media that any of us saw was obviously Facebook. This was a preview into what social media could be like. Could being the operative word, because it was not what social media eventually became. Facebook was social media for people who were social. The whole point was that you could occupy a social space with your in real life friends on Facebook. It was not meant to be a forum of anonymous internet users. It wasn't meant to be some kind of discourse space, although people used it for that. I mean, everywhere was discourse space, right? You went to your coffee shop, that was a discourse space, wasn't it? That was a place where you could exchange ideas, and Facebook was just the exact same thing, but digitally. But the environment on Facebook was totally, and this is a very hard thing to talk about. It wasn't just that you had your friends on Facebook. All of the things that were relevant on Facebook were relevant because of the firm bonds that you had formed in real life and were experiencing digitally on Facebook. It was essentially a pen pal network. Totally impossible, in my opinion, to imagine what that's like now. But Facebook was popular. It had the height of its popularity in 2009. It had its real start in 2006. Nobody used Facebook before 2006, outside of a few university campuses. But this was a kind of it was a revelation, because it it sort of foresaw the entirely online life. But what was missing, and what I had not kind of foreseen, and what kind of became the model for social media going forward, was the parasocial relationship. Now, this is not, the parasocial relationship is different than the celebrity relationship, or the relationship I would have to a local band I really liked, which is, those are all parasocial technically. For instance, there are a variety of professors that I'd worked with that didn't know my name, or I took their classes. That's a parasocial relationship. There were people, there were authors that I read, that I admired, and even looked into their lives. That was a parasocial relationship technically as well. But the internet parasocial relationship was a unique thing that hadn't quite been manifested. And when I saw it for the first time, it was really, really interesting. I remember the first one. I remember the absolute first parasocial relationship I ever had was this guy. People in the chat will remember this. So perhaps I should back up a little bit. There were in the old pre-YouTube days, people were, these were basically AV nerds who uploaded videos onto the internet, and a variety of people were affiliated with a website called That Guy with the Glasses. I was never really interested in this website, but I was a person who was very interested in the first iteration of YouTube, because I really, really liked viral videos. And I think most people came across content like this in the form of the Angry Video Game Nerd, or AVGN, right? I saw Angry Video Game Nerd. I never really liked him. It was too much of a caricature. It was too much of a caricature. Still somehow tired here. That word was harder to get out than it should have been. Angry Video Game Nerd, of course, is this guy in the fedora hat with, he's doing kind of like a Lewis Black thing, where he's playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the original Nintendo game, and getting super frustrated and swearing at the screen. And then usually it breaks off into various skits from which people can, it's a little surreal. It breaks the fourth wall. I mean, everyone at this point knows the Channel Awesome formula. These people were kind of clowns to me. But they're of the same form. This was Angry Video Game Nerd could have been a skit on MTV. And Doug Walker just looked like a low-budget skit from MTV that had been uploaded to a random website. Eventually, that was YouTube. the real breakthrough personality, the one that formed everything I understood about parasocial relationships, was not Doug Walker, the nostalgia critic, or Angry Video Game Nerd. It was the spoony one. I can't point to it because it's a picture overlay. The spoony one, Noah Antweiler. And I have no idea how I came across it. I think it was through the website aggregator Delicious, or I don't know. There was another website. Was it Mashable? That was another one that these website aggregators. They were social. They were ways that people save their bookmarks, and then based on the saves and links on the site, they would try to conglomerate them and give you what everyone else thought was a really good video or a really good video series. And you got some really strange stuff. But I remember tuning in to watch the spoony one, or Noah Antweiler, give his review of Final Fantasy VIII, which was just, I mean, it was essentially like a Doug Walker video, but there was something that was critically different about this. And I think this is what made the spoony one or Noah Antweiler's art so phenomenal and groundbreaking. For me, he was the first parasocial relationship that I ever had. And I'm qualifying this. I'm qualifying this saying like, okay, I didn't have a parasocial relationship with, Billy Corgan, even though I listened to his CDs. I did have a parasocial relationship with Noah Antweiler. And why is that? Well, let's take a back a look back on social environments in the 90s. And this is something that I think might be a good backdrop for some of the things that we're talking about on the rest of the show. So, nerd culture. Oh, this is an interesting phenomenon. I will never be able to quite communicate what nerd culture was in the 1990s. I get the sense that you guys in the Zoomer generation, or you younger millennials, kind of get a sense about what was lost, or a sense of the kind of environment that used to exist at one time. What did it mean to have a comic book or a game shop or something like that, right? Of course, there's the Simpsons character, the eternal comic book shop guy. I don't think it really captured it properly. I remember in my local comic and game shop, right? This is collectible shop. It was run by this guy that I really liked talking to. I would literally go and browse the graphic novels. And I was into anime back at the time, but I would specifically not, he was, the owner of this establishment. And to be an owner of a comic and game store in the 90s was also something that was particularly unique. I heard someone say a while back, and I can't remember who said it. They said, if you walk into a game store, or a friendly local game store, or a failing local game store, you feel like you're walking into somebody's bad life decision, right? But you feel like you're walking into somebody's bad life decision. And that's kind of how most local comic shops and game shops felt. These were indeed passion projects, and it showed. And they were not they were not good economic decisions. There's no business model that they were following. And there probably was. They obviously stayed around for a very long time, meaning that they must have made some amount of money off their products. They must have had some amount of success. They were solvent businesses. But at the same time, they weren't being run in an optimized way. The idea seemed to be that this guy really loved something about all of these things, like comics or games or role-playing games or tabletop games, or even, when I started playing Magic the Gathering, these people loved those kind of things. And they wanted to create a business that would allow them to kind of share their love of these things. And so I used to go to my local comic shop and browse like the American graphic novels specifically, because I wanted to talk to the owner about his opinion on them. I would literally I'd go there to listen, and he wouldn't have opinions on manga, which I also bought at the time, although far more sparingly. But he would have an opinion about Alan Moore and about Neil Gaiman and about half a dozen. What are the other ones? Garth Nix, or is it Garth? I don't know. The guy who did Preacher. I forget who. Was it David Sims? I'm getting my comic authors all mixed up. But these, he would have an opinion about all of them, and about the artists who illustrated each of the comics, and about who did they work with, who did they take their inspiration from, and has his work really dropped off, or did he have something really to say? And it was this kind of amazing phenomenon, because this is a person who was not stupid. This is a person who is not, and I mean, he was, like I said before, all FLGs, all failing local game stores or friendly local game stores, they all had an element of Arrested Development in the sense that they were the owner's passion project and not some kind of optimized business decision. They're an extension of a world that these people wanted to create for people and kind of manage. But at the same time, the experience you got talking to these game store owners, or these guys, these very Gen X guys who built these establishments, it was much more like talking to the owner of, say, a used bookstore, and much less like talking to a modern Reddit type personality. Modern Reddit type personalities, the people that I really think of representing nerd culture in the modern world, it's a whole different phenomenon. It feels like the consumption itself is somehow intimately bound up into their personality. The fact that it costs money, the fact that the objects are displayed prominently, the physical object seems to have a larger sense in their mind. Whereas in the 90s, or the early 2000s, at least in the pre-social media age, the people who own these establishments, almost all of them Gen X, they had a passion for what they thought was the ultimate purpose of these games: to communicate something human, to communicate something that had a deeper message to it. I mean, what was that deeper message? What were we ultimately supposed to take from something like Preacher? What were we ultimately supposed to take from something like V for Vendetta or Watchmen? And again, these are before they became multi-million-dollar movies in the 2000s. But these were like more fringe products. People wouldn't ultimately know these things, at least until the late 2000s. You would have a hard time finding people who even knew about these products. And you could get into a really long conversation about them. And eventually, as I kind of went from high school to college, I walked away from a lot of the nerd culture stuff and kind of looked more towards music and independent cinema and those kind of things. And I still miss the conversations I had with the various FLG owners and FLG denizens when they talked about comics. And so I rediscover the Spoony One. Once more, Spoony One is making these kind of video reviews, and the video review is from a Final Fantasy VIII. That's the video review that I first saw of his. And here's the thing with Spoony, or Noah Antweiler, his real name. Doug Walker was playing a character. Angry Video Game Nerd was playing a character. Noah Antweiler was playing a character, but he kind of wasn't. He was basically just talking in the same way that the owner of my failing local game store talked. And as a matter of fact, he had written a script and done a movie. I never seen this movie, but it was the movie that Spoony wrote was literally FLGS, failing local game store, a friendly local game store. He was the Gen X guy from the comic book shop that believed in his soul that these things that he had behind him, that he really enjoyed watching, they had some kind of deep cathartic meaning to them. They had some kind of deep, passionate need to exist and need to be more than what they were. Okay, so Final Fantasy. Why is Final Fantasy VIII? Why did I even start watching this? Final Fantasy VIII is kind of an interesting property in its own right. This is a game series. If people are not familiar, Final Fantasy, the game series, is a JRPG. It's sort of the JRPG, and they had done, throughout the late '90s. Throughout the late '90s, Square Enix, which was the company that produced the Final Fantasy series, had produced a series of games that I would consider, I don't want to be too hyperbolic about this, but I would consider them to be near masterpieces. Now, again, on re-examination, they don't look like that anymore. I've felt the same way about Star Wars, right? And this is another thing that a lot of Zoomers or a lot of younger millennials don't understand about Star Wars, is that when we encountered Star Wars as children, we thought we were encountering something that was sort of like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. This was a story for the ages, a story that contained deep poetic meaning to it. The prequels, as good or as bad as they were, and they were very entertaining movies, and they had a lot of redeeming parts to them, but they did not contain within them that deep poetic element of the first few entries into the series, right? And people were very upset about that, especially the Gen X crowd, right? The Gen X crowd probably were the people who had Star Wars and a lot of these late 20th century intellectual properties the most integrated into their personality. This was their mythology. And the step down between the deep spiritual themes going on in The Empire Strikes Back and they're kind of, I'm sorry to say this, but they're kind of cartoonized versions of something like the Phantom Menace was an enormous blow to their entire worldview. And I remember feeling this same step down myself. I walked into the Phantom Menace, the theaters, to watch the Phantom Menace for the first time. I guess I was in, I don't know, sixth grade, seventh grade. I was probably in junior high, I think. I walked in as a huge fan of the Star Wars series, thinking that again that it was something that Star Wars was something like Lord of the Rings, a movie of deep, poetic, spiritual meaning. And I walked out of the Phantom Menace going, I guess it isn't. I guess there isn't really. I mean, this is entertainment. Maybe Star Wars is not some kind of deep, poetic description of the universe, some kind of story for the ages, a Joseph Campbell archetype that we need to incorporate in our lives and that carries with it some deep meaning. That is a cope that I had to make because I don't know, again, the prequels have many redeeming features, but that step down was really quite radical. And the same thing is true for Final Fantasy, the series, right? These Final Fantasies aren't like Star Wars. It's not like a serial series. Every entry in the Final Fantasy genre is supposed to be an entirely independent world with an entirely independent story with characters that are totally different. There are some artistic motifs that are carried over. They always have the same, instead of horses, they always have like these giant ostrich things. They always try to incorporate a character that's named Sid and Wedge into the plot somehow. You never know who's going to be Sid or whether it's going to be male or female, but there's always going to be a character called Sid in the you just know it. It's always a thing, right? It is always a thing. And this was a series that had kind of been campy for the first few installments, but then, like Star Wars, it released a series of games, Final Fantasy VI, which I think is the first really artistic Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy VII, which was very much like Final Fantasy VI. Perhaps these were all sort of flawed creations. Perhaps some people argue over which one was better. And then there is my own personal favorite installment, Final Fantasy Tactics, which was a little bit more. The other two are kind of steampunk fantasy. That was how I would describe the genre of Final Fantasy 6 or 7. There are both swords, sorceries, and also kind of clanky steampunk robots. And that's the genre of them. And Final Fantasy Tactics is much more in the mode. The technological setting is more akin to, well, it's very much supposed to be like the War of the Roses. It's the War of the Roses with dolls. That's because the anime character makes them look like the chibi anime designs make them look like Cabbage Patch dolls. So when I show my wife the video game, she's like, "This is like Shakespeare with dolls, with Cabbage Patch dolls." It's a good description, but these games are just really, really impactful for my own psychology. Like, this is how video games become art. And then Final Fantasy VIII comes out, and Final Fantasy VIII, again, it like the prequels to Star Wars. It's not like it had no redeeming features to it. There were a lot of artistic things that they did in Final Fantasy VIII. But what it was not, it was not the continuation of the deep romantic and challenging visions that were contained in the other games. Inside Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy Tactics, there was simultaneously this idea of historical romanticism, this incredible belief in good and evil and its interaction with human psychology, and also, most importantly, this deep sense of tragedy. The characters are killed off in those games, and this is sort of, seems kind of quaint now to look back on it. But they had characters that were killed off that seemed like they were main characters, and people had to kind of realign what the plot was about and internalize an ending that was, in some sense, tragic, almost Shakespearean in the case of something like Final Fantasy Tactics. And then Final Fantasy VIII comes along, and it's essentially like a low-budget anime with a romance plot in it. And the game got less realistic in its plot and in its description of its setting, at the same time that the characters became more realistic. So it was just rife with problems. And so again, this is 10 years after, or what was it? Not even 10 years, like 7 years after the disaster that was Final Fantasy VIII comes out. The Spoony One releases his video review of Final Fantasy VIII, and I know I'm going on an incredible direct digression here. I didn't even want to talk about Final Fantasy. And sure enough, he breaks the fourth wall and does all the angry video game nerd mannerisms. But it's just his opinion on Final Fantasy VIII. It's just his frustrations playing it. It's just his genuine reaction. It would be like listening to one of those people from the comic book store just give his mind in any given piece of art or movie that had come out recently. And this immediately captured my imagination. It was like the kind of interaction and the kind of opinions that I'd get from someone in my ordinary life, but on the internet, in the form of the Spoony One, talking about his favorite games and his favorite, or his, in this case, in most cases, his great disappointment at the direction of these things. He believed so earnestly that these things were meaningful and were something that he could organize his life around. And then when they became consumer products, he was betrayed. That was, this Noah Antweiler, unfortunately, as it turned out, he said they betrayed us. He was a genuine person. This wasn't the Noah Antweiler you'd see in his pre-recorded and edited reviews. Was the same Noah Antweiler that would be going to the comic book conventions screaming, "They betrayed us! They betrayed us!" Totally bipolar disorder person and a completely unstable personality. Noah Antweiler was part of the whole Channel Awesome scene with Doug Walker, by far, in my opinion, the most talented of the bunch. His ability to talk just off the top of his head and come up with genuinely insightful takes about culture was total inspiration. Actually, it's probably why I'm even doing this podcast. It's like my attempt to channel Noah Antweiler to do politics as opposed to criticizing JRPGs from 23 years ago or whatever. That was the idea, was that this is a real person who happens to be editing together a video. He's not a caricature. He is that real person. Now the problem is that eventually, when Noah Antweiler made his personality part of his online persona, eventually the online persona devoured him whole. It felt like, and this probably was just his untreated, or I don't know, really, if you can treat bipolar disorder. I know a lot of people who have bipolar personality disorders, conditions. I don't know what to call them, and they don't even medicate, and they're fine. Other people definitely do need to medicate, but eventually his explosions, his oscillations between depression and, literally going to game conventions and screaming at the top of his lungs at game developers about how they betrayed him. This eventually ended up just destroying all his relationships. He made some off-color jokes about former girlfriends, and this was before, I don't even know what would have happened to him today's internet. And eventually he burns all of his bridges. He ends up isolated, and he's still out there. He still has a Twitter account. He still has a lot of fans, including myself, who, if a new Noah Antweiler video dropped, I'd probably watch it. This was kind of a seminal person on the history of the internet. But at the same time, the parasocial relationship, you could kind of see an early form of what the parasocial relationship entailed. The more of you that was defined online, there would be a certain blowback from that. You couldn't psychologically insulate yourself from that. I mean, all of the Channel Awesome people were kind of cautionary tales in that regard. But it was interesting to see, how the first kind of like online parasocial relationship I ever developed happened, and how the first crash out happened as well. And I think that's kind of what we're examining at this point, now that social media is, oh my God, it's 20 years old, 20 years of social media. 20 years of social media, what has it taught us? What have we learned about parasocial relationships? What lessons have we learned? And how are we using it in our imperative to do politics correctly? Now, I mean, that's the slide. That's the slide. What have we learned? Well, this kind of gets me into the various things that I want to talk about. I don't know, in no particular order. This last part of the thing I talked about in my in real life talk last Saturday, tying it back into California politics a little bit, was just the things online are kind of, I mean, some people have the ability just to stay on social media platforms almost indefinitely and be a constant presence. I don't know if I can do that. I hope I can. I feel like I've been a fairly constant presence online. I don't think I've really changed all that much. I certainly have been somewhat radicalized by modern events, but I don't think my personality has changed that much at all. But what inevitably you get in late social media systems is you get an initial surge of enthusiasm as the online space allows you to accelerate personal relationships and experience things that you would ordinarily not be able to experience. The Spoonie one gave me a parasocial relationship that in many ways replicated the kind of relationship that I had with somebody who owned a store in my hometown. But I had moved away many years and I hadn't really been into that hobby for even more. And so now here I was having a parasocial relationship with this person, being able to concoct out of nothingness that kind of special feeling I got initially when talking about Neil Gaiman or the Max or Preacher or Metropolitan or any of the other kind of indie graphic novels from the 90s. the problem is eventually the algorithm consumes everything in the social media space. People either conform their personalities to the algorithm and are kind of absorbed by it, or kind of enslaved to it, or they develop independently of the algorithm and the algorithm crushes them, so to speak. And you get the crash out cycle. I think if you let yourself get absorbed by the algorithm, you also experience a crash out cycle. But this brings me to the first thing that happened. That's the first thing on my list of things to talk about this week was the new distant right crash out. Again, this has been going on for 3 weeks. It's mainly concerned Academic Agent and a few other people. How we escaped the distant right slop matrix. I don't know what there is to say about this. I've written a lot about it. First of all, I mean, I still consider Academic Agent a friend. He's a great content creator. He is somebody who's written a variety of really worthwhile books. I always recommend The Populist Delusion as a book that people should check out to get an introduction to Italian elite theory. And I haven't really watched his YouTube channel very much. It's not really my bag. Sounds horribly Austin Powers, but it's not really my thing anymore. Originally, I kind of watched Unpopular Opinions, but that again was of a different time, right? Unpopular Opinions was the friendly side to the era of internet blood sports. Well, now discourse isn't really living, so what are we talking about in huge panel shows anymore, right? People want commentary that's more pointed, or they want something that's just more easy listening. They don't want things that are challenging, or they want things that are so challenging that they just get in, make a point, and get out again. Due to a variety of effects. That the end of discourse, as we've talked about continuously on this show. Academic Agent, though, for the longest time has, in the loudest possible way, been trying to concoct a fight with the right wing. Now, the problem with all of these things is I've seen this movie before. Oh my God, the distant right is so terrible. The distant right is so terrible. These types of crash outs against the distant right have been happening for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Just to put this in context, 2 years ago, when this was going on, I can't remember if it was late 2023 or early 2000 or 2024, either one. I think maybe it was mid-year 2024. There are a variety of people who were going on about how terrible the distant right was. And I wrote an article called The Distant Right and Its Discontents. A year later, there was a new crop of people that were complaining about how terrible the distant right was. And my friend, the librarian of Colano, wrote another article called the same thing, The Distant Right and Its Discontents, about this phenomenon of people falling away from the distant right. Even more, I did a whole last year when this happened, almost exactly a year ago to this day. I was literally inviting people on this channel to debate the decline of the distant right. And ironically enough, the person who came on to make the case about how the dissident right was so terrible, how it was the most deplorable thing ever, was this blogger called Non-Zionism. A deceptive turn of phrase, because as it turned out, Non-Zionism was the blogger under the title Non-Zionism was an Orthodox Jew who lived as a settler in one of Israel's disputed regions. And his main case against the distant right was that it was anti-Semitic. So for almost an hour, he harangued me over the fact that the distant right had gone all in on conspiracy slop. And it was just low IQ, and we made too many errors, and we were getting involved with people like Daryl Cooper. Daryl Cooper was a big boogeyman back in the day. He was a big boogeyman because he was anti-Israel and anti-Churchill, and that was dangerous, dissident right slop. And the person that non-Zionism really zeroed in on as a classic bad actor, the epitome of how the distant right was producing slop was, drumroll please, academic agent. So in the process of defending the dissident right, I spent most of my time with non-Zionism defending academic agent as the avatar of the dissident right. Only for exactly 1 year later, academic agent to essentially criticize me for defending the low quality of the dissident right. So academic agent thinks that the dissident right is low quality slop because it doesn't take seriously the idea that there are manipulators behind the scene in the globalist government that are pushing things in certain directions, that I don't spend enough time talking about Jewish influence, and that I'm not sufficiently anti-Zionist. Whereas on the other hand, non-Zionism thought the dissident right was slop because it didn't practice mainstream politics. It didn't focus on quality control. It pursued too many conspiracy theories, and it was too anti-Semitic. It's you can't win. You're damned if you do. You're damned if you're not. Is there any space in the internet world for right wingers who are just not Zionists, who just want to have a sane society to live in, who are aware that decisions are made by elites? But I don't know. I'm not going to redesign my entire understanding of the world based on what Epstein did or didn't do. We'll get into Epstein later, right? But I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, wow, the Zionists are for policy X, therefore I have to be anti-policy X. That's ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is the real world. This isn't a cartoon. I might not have the same project as the Zionists, and I think a lot of their projects are incredibly terrible and deleterious for the indigenous European populations and the European populations of North America, or the Christian populations in North America. I think they're horrible. But I don't just sit here and decide that I'm going to orient my political worldview based on doing the opposite of whatever the Zionists seem to be doing in the moment. This is insanity. You have to talk about things issue by issue, idea by idea, person by person. If a content creator is creating bad content, you actually have to point at them and say they're producing bad content, or whatnot. I mean, again, and so I can see this person being mentioned in the description or in the chat here. And indeed, exactly a year ago, the big crash out, the big distant right is slop discourse person was Alex Kashuda, a person that I had supported for many years and had promoted for many years. And the critique, you could take academic agent's article and cross out the name and write in Alex Kashuda, and you would get Alex Kashuda's article against the dissident right. It would be the exact same article. But again, Alex Kashuda's article, her leaving the dissident right article, once more, her criticism of the dissident right was that it wasn't mainstream enough, it wasn't pro-Zionist enough, it wasn't in line enough with modern experts, it engaged too much in conspiratorial thinking. So again, it's the exact same critique, it's the exact same article, but the diagnosis is completely reversed. I don't mean to of course, like this, right? Well, this is a word that doesn't really mean anything, and indeed it doesn't. So you could make anything dissident right if you want. I could just say the Republican Party is dissident right. New conservatives are dissident right. Therefore, I denounce the dissident right, and by dissident right, I mean Paul Wolfowitz. Whatever. I could just say that. I could write an article. I think Paul Wolfowitz and the rest of the neocon with Irving Kristol or Bill Kristol, they produce slop content, in my opinion. Certainly Mark Levine produces slop discourse. Why don't we just make that the new dissident right, denounce that? The problem is that I think that in both Kashuda's case and academic agent's case, and let's add more people into this whole thing. Richard Spencer, another person that's fallen off the bandwagon, that's gone on to this, I denounce the dissident right. Pedro Gonzalez, another person that says, I denounce the dissident right. Even before that, Kantbot, who's the original person that was associated with the intellectual brand of the dissident right, and then wrote the classic Escaping the Right Matrix article that Academic Agent wrote. They're the exact same complaints. They're the exact same article. You could just sub them out. And each person I mentioned in that little series, Pedro Gonzalez, Richard Spencer, Radfem Hitler, Kantbot, Alex Kashuda, Academic Agent, they all have completely, Richard Hanania, we'll throw him in there too. They all have completely different ideologies. Completely different ideologies. I mean, just take one issue. Catherine D from Default Friend brought this up as well. She said something like, well, there's a new emerging post-right scene that includes people like Academic Agent and Nick Fuentes and Richard Hanania and Pedro Gonzalez. She didn't mention Kashuda, but she might as well have. And I'm just thinking to myself, look, these people have nothing in common other than their personal beefs, which are never personal. They're always alluded to. The personal beefs are always alluded to in the broadest possible way. They never say, I have a problem with Dave Green. They never say, I have a problem with Aaron McIntyre. It's always the dissident right. It's always the dissident right. Which means, of course, that what is obviously a personal beef is never actually resolved. It's always alluded to. You could take all of those names that Catherine D mentioned and take the issue that they all seem to talk the most about, which is, drum roll please, Zionism. Richard Hanania is obviously a huge pro-Zionist. So is Nathan Kofnes. So is, I think, Pedro Gonzalez. Certainly so is Richard. So is Richard. Hanania I already said. What is the... anyway, Richard Spencer, of course. I think he's a Zionist too, isn't he? And then you have the other people, Nick Fuentes, Academic Agent, them. And they're huge anti-Zionists to the point where it's not good enough for me not to be a Zionist. I have to be vocally against the latest thing that's associated with the Zionist position. Not like engage in a conversation on the point on its merits, just that, look, this issue is supported by a Zionist, therefore you have to oppose it. Even on that one issue, which again is a hugely important issue for all of the post-dissident right thinkers, they can't agree. There are complete loggerheads. There's no consilience, there's no consensus, and they will cite each other. Academic Agent, in his dissident right article or in his series of posts on Substack denouncing the slop right matrix, he cites Richard Spencer as somebody who was ahead of his time. But Richard Spencer, I mean, Academic Agent is promoting some kind of weird esoteric politics that focuses blame on sort of a tightly knit cabal of global Zionist leaders. Richard Spencer, at least in his current iteration, is like, he's from moderate democratic politics. All of these people that Academic Agent describes as his fellow escapees from the slop right matrix don't agree with him on seemingly his most important issue, his most, what he considers to be the most important issue. This creates kind of an issue. Now, this is, did I hit this right? Yeah. What I call the curse of Kantbot. And I hope this doesn't happen to Academic Agent, but the problem, we've misdiagnosed the problem. This is the reason why this is going on the way it is. So the first person that I was aware of who was one of these right-wing luminaries who then bugged out and became a more mainstream figure was, of course, Kantbot. This was, people might remember him from this epic cut that was going around during Trump's first presidential run, where he talks about how Trump is going to make Thule raise from the ocean. That's because Trump is going to complete the system of German idealism. Trump is a Kantian. Schelling couldn't do it. Fichte couldn't do it. Trump, or is it Fichte? Trump is a Kantian. He's screaming at this reporter, all this babble about German idealism in this nonsensical way. This was sort of a Sam Hyde skit that made Kampbot immediately famous. The issue is at one point, Kampbot, this is around 2021, he just kind of lost his marbles or something. He got this bug in him and decided that the right-wing sphere that he associated with was becoming too normy. And he needed to kind of distance himself from that. So he went on this attack vector against the right wing generally. And people have pointed this out, right? Pedro Gonzalez is another good example of this. Pedro Gonzalez, who's a brilliant writer, he got into an argument with other right-wingers about, of all meaningless things, who to support for primary, in a primary between Trump and DeSantis. Pedro Gonzalez being a big DeSantis guy. And his candidate lost. And because of that, he decided that he was no longer going to cooperate with the online right. The problem is, this is what my article was saying. The problem is that the dissident right is not a movement. We're not a clique of people that are all having parties together. I guess if you're a member of the OGC or Sildings, you can come to the conferences. If you do basket weaving, which I highly recommend, you can get a little bit of a implicit community of people who are interested in these ideas. But there's no clique of distant right people that you can denounce like it's the Masons or the Elks or something like that. The distant right is just a series of problems that people have noticed. This is the point of my article, The Distant Right and Its Discontents. The thing is that you might not like the people who talk about these problems. But these problems, I outlined about 9 of them, having to do with how modern society organizes itself. These sociological problems, our ruling class does not acknowledge or is actively causing. They're at the center of almost all political issues when it comes down either to how we manage borders, to how we manage technology, to how we manage the relations between sexes, to how we manage the relations between races. All modern political conflicts have one of these misperceptions at the heart of them. And they are denied by our ruling class. And so it's impossible not to mention them. So, okay, let's say this is what creates the curse of Cantbot, because Cantbot's an incredibly prominent person. He runs these podcasts. In 2020, Cantbot is, I would say, a very prominent online figure. In 2023, he is a troll. He appears in people's comment sections. All he does is whine about right-wingers constantly. That's all that he seems capable of doing. Is there nothing that's worthy to comment about other than that? Are there no books to write? Are there no interviews to host? Why not talk to some new people like Nick Land or Kurt? Cantbot did one of the first interviews with Curtis Yarvin before everyone else did. Why not look to more intellectuals? Why not talk about these issues at a deeper level? Why not do, as many people have done, art projects having to do with it? Certainly that was what Cantbot seemed like he was edging towards before Geo beat him to it, I guess, at least in the Canadian context. But none of that happens. All that I know about Cantbot currently is that he just appears in people's comment sections and complains about right-wingers. The same thing is true for Pedro Gonzalez, brilliant writer, great podcaster, gets Trump derangement syndrome because his preferred candidate loses a primary, and suddenly his career is just complaining about right-wingers. It's all he does. All he does is bait them and complain about them. And I think that is, what people are mistaking here is they're superimposing their complaints about how social networks work with their ideological problems. And I certainly want to sympathize with this. Slumpification or degradation or crash outs, this is a natural property of all social media networks. Once ideas become popular, their version that's amenable to the algorithm, will become more popular on social media than the actual real version of the argument. This might not even be a property of social media. This could just be the property of all human social relationships, which is why many people like Leo Strauss, the original, so early 20th century, I hesitate to say right wing, but he inspired a lot of right wing movements. The original, the Strauss, that was sort of one of these original thinkers that led to places like the Claremont Institute and even some early neocons. And he pointed out that the thinkers that we sort of celebrate in our modern world, like Aristotle and Plato, they were all political actors in their own right, and they had sort of this public position and this private position. And the private position were the real teachings. They kind of, in some sense, what we have of their writings is their private position, is their real beliefs. But I think always implicitly in Strauss is this idea that there was even behind that there was a subtle layer of meaning inside a lot of these ancient thinkers that communicated what you really should take from them. It's irresistible to academics because it invites infinite rereadings of texts at even deeper levels of symbolism and all this stuff. But this is a function of human organizations, of the human collective organism, is that slopification and crash outs happen. So eventually, and I'm really frustrated about this too. I mean, right-wing discourse on X is insanely crude. I don't know how people who are on the more activist side even maintain this anymore. I can't stand it. I'm looking at the fight that's going on in Minneapolis, where people are cheering on ICE officers or cheering against them. And I can't stand. I mean, it's just slop politics. It's slop politics. Nothing I say is going to make ICE win this battle. And in the meantime, I'm sticking my nose into controversies. Like you have ICE officers shoot somebody under strange circumstances, and a video pops up on the internet, and nobody can see what happens in this video. It's impossible to see what happened in this video. And right off the bat, immediately, everybody who is on the right-wing side develops one opinion. Everybody who's against it develops the exact opposite opinion. And none of this is based in fact, but they all swear up and down that it is, right? They all swear up and down that in that 5 seconds of grainy footage, they saw the truth and everyone else was watching a different movie. The same thing is true. I mean, it's a ridiculous proposition because nobody, if you took any person aside who participates in this discourse and you said, okay, let's say that the shooting of Renee Good was just an execution. Like these were just evil guys, and she was on the way back from dropping off her kids at school, and they thought she was the Antifa, and they just shot her because she was in the way. Would that change your opinion about whether the United States should have enforceable immigration policy? Of course it doesn't. So this whole dialogue is totally fake. And the same thing is true for the people who are anti-ICE, although they would never own the implicit proposition that's obviously in play, which is that the United States should not have enforceable borders. They believe that the United States should not enforce their borders in any way that would be workable. They want the Biden idea of border enforcement. You see somebody on American soil, you give them a court date and make them pinky promise to come back and go to that court date and then go back to their home countries if they are found to be not legal citizens. This will never happen because these immigrants will never attend their court date, nor will their court date come up frequently because the courts would be backlogged. The people who are coming in, how many, there was a million migrants, I think, that happened in the last year of probably more than that. Probably it was more like 2 or 3. But there's tens of millions of these people living in the country. They couldn't all get court dates and they wouldn't attend if they were. Uh, so functionally, what the left is asking for is no borders, but that's not what's being debated online. There's no discourse here. It's just a video is posted up, and now we have to chimp out, and we have to chimp out on the side that is our side. This is an incredibly, for somebody who sees themselves as driving a more interesting intellectual conversation, to participate in this level of politics feels kind of degrading. I'm not going to lie, it feels degrading for me. I can't use X anymore. And I'll get into other dramas that have occurred as well. And so what happens is the people who are in these circles, especially if they've come from the left, they think to themselves, wow, I remember how academia was. I remember how smart people talk to each other. Now I went to the right because the discourse space that was the real world was shut down after 2017. You couldn't have any conversations in public anymore without getting canceled. But now, what's the alternative? I'm sitting here on social media chimping out, supposedly clapping like a seal for an administration that appears to not even have his eye on the real ball in the game. This is degrading. So what will I do? Well, the first time when this happened to me in academia, I switched sides. So I guess I should switch sides again and denounce the dissident right. Okay, great. But it doesn't really work like that. It doesn't really work like that because you can never really have a conversation on the merits. Because let's say Academic Agent and R.N. McIntyre I'm using R.N. McIntyre as kind of a good example of somebody who I would consider to be the premier distant right person. And he certainly had, a very notable disagreement with Academic Agent. Uh, these people, they wouldn't. What would the real argument even be over? What would the real argument even be between Academic Agent and R.N. McIntyre? And R.N. McIntyre, insofar as serious people are tolerant of the sort of chimp politics that goes on X, he has a much higher tolerance for it than I do. And he's actually really good at driving it as well. And there's a need for that. It's obvious that this is the kind of thing that Academic Agent is upset about, that he's implicitly complaining about in all of his articles, so on and so forth. If Academic Agent sat down with R.N. McIntyre, I doubt that he could find a substantive disagreement. All he would do is he would ask R.N. McIntyre to denounce trolls. And the same thing is true for anybody. I don't know if I want to go to Xitter, but we could, right? Just because this is the same conversation over and over and over, going to have to use all of my examples. Xitter and Gonzalez essentially have this giant podcast where they denounce, a number of people on the dreaded dissident right, and this gets put on blast with the approval of the authors by no one less than the New York Times. So now in the paper of record, you've got these people who were supported by the right denouncing them. And if you listen to the whole podcast, announcing specific people, some of who are my friends by name. And but if for instance, Gonzalez or Xitter were to sit down with me and have a conversation about the ideas that they disagree with me on, they would not be able to identify legitimate argument of contention. It would all be appeals to vibes, appeals to optics, appeals to what trolls have done, what bad actors have done in their comment section, names they were called, so on and so forth, personal interactions that were unsavory. I can't do this. I'm sure Academic Agent has been called all sorts of names by brain-dead conservative Zionists. I can't use that as an excuse to redesign my entire worldview around counter-signaling those people. Nor can I do the same for Kantbot or Gonzalez or any of these people. It's an unreasonable expectation. It's a non-ideological disagreement, and inevitably this leads to a complete crash out because there's nowhere to go from this. I'll go on. I made these slides quickly. I don't exactly know what to make of the other side of it, the chimp politics side of the equation. Obviously, like I said, the Minneapolis thing is ongoing. It's kind of funny to see the left going insane once more and eating their own. Most notably, they were trying to cancel Will Stancil, which he attended a rally and wasn't sufficiently apologizing for his white privilege, and kind of got caught up in a bad moment. And there was rumors: is this Will Stancil's journey to the intellectual dark web? Is this when the Stancil began to hate? I don't know. These things, these moments. First of all, there's going to be many of them. There's going to be another run of these things in summer. As a matter of fact, the real riots will start in summer of 2026. Now, what is this going to do? It's going to mobilize the Democratic base for the midterms, which is the reason to have riots. The Democratic Party is of the opinion, and I'm not so sure that they're wrong, that riots and civil disruptions energize their base. And the exact opposite is true for Republicans. If Republican activists and the police get into a big scuffle, then Republican voters are less willing to come out and pull the lever for their candidates. It scares them away. When Democratic activists get into a big scuffle with police, it appears that it makes Democratic voters more likely to come out and pull the lever for the mainstream Democratic candidate. An interesting dynamic, but like, what is there to say? Well, what is there to say that's interesting about this? This is the reality. I mean, the die is cast, right? The die is cast. I mean, we could talk about social media and what people are saying on social media. Social media is not going to impact the next. Well, what is it? We're in February now. The election's in November. You've got 9 months. There's 9 months of action, and your impact on this is zero. What's going to happen is what's going to happen. There's not going to be new Republican voters that are put on the scene. Republican voters aren't going to start behaving differently, and neither are Democratic voters. There could be some remarkable event that changes people's opinions or attitudes about how politics works in America. And maybe people will be so tired of this cycle, they'll start noticing how the cycle works. Then in this latest summer of love in 2026, they'll get tired of the shtick, and the Democratic attempt to bring more of its voters to the poll will totally backfire. That is very possible. It's possible too that the NGOs are crippled by the cuts. Well, not crippled exactly, but they're bleeding so much from the cuts in USAID that they can't put their entire force behind it. And the machine doesn't kick off the same way it did. But nothing that we do here is going to impact that. And again, I feel like taking a back seat and seal clapping things kind of, I'm not going to lie. I was hearing a lot of complaints from people like Morgoth and people, a lot of the Europeans in the wake of the last 2 weeks, especially around the Greenland thing. Trump is saber rattling over Greenland. I can't control whether the United States invades Greenland or not. And take it from somebody whose family is half Canadian, whose son is a dual citizen. I'll give this advice to Europeans who are super concerned about Greenland. Your leaders are currently conspiring to be the new dumping location for all of South Asia's excess male population. As somebody who spent a lot of time in Canada over the last 3 years, I will tell you, the amount of permafrost area inside the Arctic Circle you own, your country has control over on a piece of parchment paper is going to matter a whole hell of a lot less than inviting 100 million Indians into your country. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. And they could easily invite 100 million Indians into Europe. They will absolutely do that. And when they do, you're not going to care about how much permafrost land you own inside the Arctic Circle. I'm just saying, right? That being said, I understand from a European point of view, how it's incredibly emasculating to have an ally basically demand that you hand over sovereign territory on a whim. And furthermore, it's kind of disgusting to go to a situation that you can't impact and relitigate interactions that played out over the course of 5 seconds. You know, in this really in the public square. You know, in the public square, it's kind of amazing. It's amazing that people still do it. I mean, I know people have to do it. People have to do it because we have to own the news cycle. The news cycle controls the algorithm. The algorithm controls power. Therefore, you have to chimp out. Otherwise, you're not going to get your will realized in the public square. I understand, though. I understand the frustration of the Europeans. I understand the frustration of people like Morgoth, an academic agent. But this just kind of brings me to an obvious phenomenon we're saying. The flip side of the place where we started at the beginning of this talk, which is the quiet death of social media. Initially, when I was talking about the beginnings of Facebook, social media was a social phenomenon. Facebook was a social phenomenon. It was a place that reflected your content. It is very easy to see the decline from something like Facebook or a social media environment largely organized around things like Facebook in the 2010s to a social media environment largely organized around Twitter or anonymous social media or TikTok in 2020. The decline is that we went from a under-optimized personal social media space that was largely about speeding up personal relationships to one that was high speed and anonymous. Something you might remember reaching its zenith or its high point in 2018, the era of internet blood sports. Internet blood sports, that era, the era that was sort of the height of my YouTube channel, was a very weird time. People were 100% invested in their social media portfolios, 100% convinced that social media could change the world, and also thought that they could organize there in a meaningful way and in a way that would not largely impact them. Getting a large social media following was something that you did. It was not something that the algorithm delivered to you. So we have the personal era of social media. We have the anonymous era of social media, the high speed watermark of social media. And now we have the crash out, the slop era of social media. All my social media feeds are comprised of is people who I know who write about politics semi-professionally, algorithmically generated crap, people who are intentionally trying to run the drama cycles and juice the algorithm so that they can rule a cloud cycle like Milanopolis. And then literally AI generated slop. And I shall say also celebrities, which also even our celebrities feel like the celebrities we have right now look like just very big influencers that play on network television. They don't look particularly talented. They don't look like they're out of control like early rock stars were in the era of MTV. They're just larger social media influencers, and all of their behaviors are completely focus grouped and optimized to appeal to an algorithm's behavior. That is what they're optimized for. And I have noticed in my own life, I look at Twitter because I'm addicted to Twitter. Because I instinctively look at Twitter when I have a spare moment. I don't like it. It makes me feel miserable. It brings all sorts of negative emotions to the fore. I don't really feel like I'm making an impact. Like, for instance, I had a variety of really good explainer tweets that went out, and they got like 4 or 5 retweets. Then I put a picture of Sydney Sweeney and Sabrina Carpenter on a tweet, and it got 2,000 retweets and 60 million views because I had seen that Sydney Sweeney is more attractive or something like that, or she's attractive to straight men, whereas Sabrina Carpenter is an artifact of kind of like the gay male understanding of what straight men would like. Uh, like absolute slop. Like it's not just that there are slop accounts out there that generate slop. The slop that I generate has 3 orders of magnitude larger footprint on my own social media account than does the actual meaningful, cathartic, purposeful content that I produce with the attempt to actually learn something or open up a door. Furthermore, ordinary people don't really use social media anymore. They just kind of doom scroll on it. They doom scroll on it to the extent that they participate. More and more people are moving to group chats. More and more people are going to group chats. They're reinventing Facebook. Now, I mean, it's more segregated, but they're reinventing Facebook because the conversations that go on social media have become so toxic, so devoured by the algorithm that they're just totally unusable to ordinary people. And I think maybe this could be an advantage. Obviously, I think when I see social media dying, I immediately wonder if this is not kind of an evolution, a measure of psychic security, where we have to have cognitive security. We have to be aware of how algorithms are programming us. And inside a group chat, I can control my cognitive security. And on Twitter, I really can't. I really can't. It's impossible. I can organize on a group chat. On social media platforms, I cannot. And no one's talking about this. Everyone can see it in the numbers. Everyone can see it in the attitudes that we take to social media. But it's becoming kind of a relic of a bygone age. We've passed peak social media. It can only go down from here. I think India, I mean, obviously, people complain about Indians being online. I bet you anything that is the only growth that social media sees is from India and the developing world. That is why they're bringing broad online so fast, because the only place that social media can actually get growth. Everywhere else in the Western world, it's slowly declining. And this is sort of like the new sad thing. I mean, I don't know. I really want to get into this. You know, the whole Sarah Stock meltdown. There is something to be said for learnings. Social media is toxic. It is particularly toxic for women. This is something that I've learned a lot about in the last year, especially the combination of social media and politics. It is this absolutely disastrous mixture. When you look at the protests that are going on in Minneapolis, there are just these armies of women, these armies and armies and armies of underemployed women who are just addicted to some kind of social media group chat. And it's convinced them that they essentially need to die for a revolution that's not happening and that they don't even understand the parameters to. It's kind of interesting how it works, though. In the left wing, in the left egregore, the social media algorithm devours women. There is a certain preference audiences have for political action, and women conform to it, not in an attempt to grift, but because they've literally been memed into being fanatics for it. They've turned off their brains. They're not connecting this to facts or reason. They're just reacting to the general political will of the moment. They interact with it as true believers. In the right-wing sphere, it's the opposite. for women. Women come on to the right wing sphere to essentially exploit it. There is a dearth of women in the right wing space. And while in many ways right wing men are much more successful in eventually creating families than are their equivalents on the left, despite the fact that the left has almost all of the women, you know, general success kind of beats just being near women eventually. There still is this incredible hunger on the right wing to have your ideas represented by the based trad girl. The problem is at this stage, these people are just totally unreliable in terms of how they operate. The Sarah Stock scandal just hit. I'm not going to repeat it, but it feels like an exact repeat of Lauren Southern. I mean, she even kind of looks like a younger Lauren Southern. She's even Canadian like Lauren Southern. These people, they find the right wing sphere because they want to have a certain role in a social environment. And the right wing gives them this for almost nothing. And they have a meteoric rise, but very few of them are true believers. Once the social media algorithm runs out, their popularity declines. They inevitably crash out. That's what happened to a lot of influencers. They have an initial meteoric rise, and then I think one of two things happens, right? One of two things happens. Either their popularity, they talk about sort of non-gender slop topics, just general dissident right topics that I talk about concerning culture and power and the nature of society. In which case, unless they're very, very talented, like someone like Aiden Paladin, who's able to come up with unique insights, their popularity eventually fades and they crash out. Alternatively, they get involved in the kind of whatever podcast gender war, I like homath, but the kind of gender slop discourse, in which case more often than not, they crash out in a different way. They either purity spiral and then are shown to be hypocrites, or they literally just have a scandal because this whole thing was a front from the beginning. They're essentially kept influencers and they have zero will to resist anything, and their credibility is completely destroyed. This is the ride that we've been on with right-wing e-girls for 10 years now. The story is always the same. We've done this even with the same e-girl. We've done this like 3 or 4 times with Lauren Southern. It's always the same story. And being a person, if you are, I don't know, maybe this is really fun for people like Lauren Southern, writing these drama cycles again and again and again and again and again, constantly riding the algorithm to the top and then having a huge explosion and crash out and then getting on the ride again. This is, and I had a conversation with Walt Bismarck a year or two ago about this. This is fun, might be fun for the girls involved. This is not very much fun if you're a guy that cares about serious ideas in the wake of it, because it makes you look like a complete idiot. It makes you look like an absolute sucker. It makes it look like these girls can come on and say anything and you'll buy it because they're pretty and blonde. These girls will give you false promises of conversion. They'll make you praise their virtues to the high heaven. They'll have you defend them against trolls. They'll have you double swear that they're the most virtuous woman you've ever met. And then 6 months later, they'll tell everyone, I didn't believe in any of that. I didn't believe any of that. Those aren't my values. I was tricked by the social media algorithm, and they'll say the exact opposite things. That's not a ride that is fun to be on as somebody who's interested in actually developing community or creating discourse in an age where discourse is long dead. It's not a very fun ride to be on. And at some point, you just have to say, I'm not going to play this game anymore. I don't know. I mean, there's going to be a new Sarah Stock. There's going to be a new Lauren Southern we're going to get a new one in 2 months' time. And we're going to be playing the exact same game again because people can't stop simping. There was, I remember Arch and Carl Benjamin were on a stream. This was about a month ago. And they're talking about just OnlyFans. And OnlyFans should be illegal. There was recently a woman who was filming herself. She had just gotten $100 million from OnlyFans, like an egregious amount of money, an insane amount of money. And Sargon, I should just call him Carl and Arch Warhammer and everyone else on the stream, everyone else my age, we're just thinking to ourselves, who is simping for these women? Who are the people who are simping for these women? I mean, it's certainly not people in my position. That's all of these women. They only get money. They're taking hard-earned money from men for providing services that are available for free online and can be generated for free by LLMs. There's no organic demand for this kind of thing. There's only an organic demand for a parasocial relationship. A parasocial relationship which is fake. I guess, in some sense, I was willing to pay the Spoonie one, for a parasocial relationship that I knew was fake. But what did I get out of it? I guess I got kind of a pseudo interaction that was like the interaction I got from my failing local game store. That was kind of cool. I gained inspiration for how I wanted to run a podcast myself. I've built communities around social media properties that have actually resulted in friendships. And I think even 1 or 2 marriages, if you draw the net wide enough. But still, I can't imagine paying for a woman to pretend to be my girlfriend when you know that she's got a million other guys on the line doing the exact same thing. Who is simping for these people? And the only conclusion I could come to was that it's basically just boomers. Probably our inner circle knows better than to trust right-wing e-girls at this stage. Probably most right-wingers do as well. Even though, as a man, there's this little thing in your mind, whenever a woman's speaking your opinions, you immediately listen to her. It's hard. It's an instinctive reaction. It's hard to avoid. But we know better in at least our forebrains that this is all fake, that these people are repeating talking points, that an algorithm is being played. What this system runs on are essentially boomers. We all know the boomers, spiritually speaking, keep cable news going. They're the only ones who are still watching CNN. Well, if we draw our net for boomers a little bit wider and include older Gen X people in it, or maybe even younger Gen X people, it's probably the Gen X and boomers who are going to keep the pathological elements of social media running. They aren't just going to get sucked into doom scrolling the way that people in my generation do, because it's there and we're bored and we're waiting for something at work. They're not going to have a moment of weakness and then throw a $5 gift to some influencer or something, or a super chat. And hey, if people want to entropy chat me, I'm here. I know I'm not really selling myself, but these boomers are they're going to engage with social media the way that I used to engage with social media in 2018. Social media is reality. That's what it felt like in 2018. Social media is just reality early. And if you develop yourself on social media and you develop your social media relationships, then you're going to have a slice of that reality. And so I bet that there's just tons of these boomers and Gen Xers who are feeding these algorithms more money and more time. And for decades, these people are going to be in these circles doing this. There'll be zombie institutions with zombie celebrities at the heads of them, but they're still going to be feeding these processes. Let's see if I can continue here. The central thing about the woman question and the boomer question online. Why is the woman question the same as the boomer question? Well, the first thing is that I'm sure that a lot of the simping going on is being driven by boomers. But the second thing is, what we've learned about social media is that social media is an entropic force that destroys things. And in order to build anything, you need to put 4, 5, 6 times the amount of energy in than you do to just sit on top of the algorithm. Boomers and most online e-girls organize themselves around one central understanding. Nothing pays more than fucking things. Pushing things down, exploiting systems that have benefit to them that are unsustainable, taking what you can out of the moment and then just leaving a mess behind because screw the future, who cares, we got ours. Nothing pays more than that. That's what the algorithm wants you to do. That's what our social security system wants you to do. That's what the housing market wants to do. And nothing pays more than doing that thing. The only problem is it's not sustainable. It is obviously not sustainable. We've seen the end of social media for the first cohort of people, my cohort of people. Eventually it'll end for the boomers too. Eventually it'll end for the Gen Xers. And it'll be a much more degraded experience when it does. And the fate of all e-girls online, essentially, is to crash out in their own contradictions. The central crisis in the political internet, as I've learned it can be summarized in this way. The people who win discourse are not the same as the people who win the algorithm. Initially, when we were part of the internet, the idea is that the algorithm would bend in the direction of a certain argument that was had and was won. Now, the argument might not be correctly decided, but it would bend in the way that the argument went. A good example of this are two things. The first two arguments that I got onto on the internet: religion versus atheism, and gay marriage. Dramatic pause for that second one. Now, I switched my position on both of these. When I started the internet, I was an atheist agnostic who was very into all of those new atheists before they even got cool, because I was a hipster back then. I was also for gay marriage. Now, atheism won, gay marriage won, and the algorithm rewarded those two positions. And by 2010 or 12, those positions that had won the argument online got into positions of power, essentially, in the American government. And that is the internet working as prophesized. That's the thing. You have the idea, you win the argument, you convince the most people, and then the algorithm rewards you and manifests that element of discourse into the real world. After 2016, the exact opposite happened. People would win discourse, they would win arguments, but the algorithm would cut against it. People were banned. The algorithm was gamed for slow, low information interactions. Destiny was the great victor of internet blood sports. Destiny. What idea did Destiny have that was better than any of his rivals? His entire worldview is a bunch of sewn together garbage with zero coherency. But he won the algorithm. The algorithm rewarded what he produced even though all of his ideas were bullshit and were losing day in and day out when it came to what people actually believed. The discourse and arguments went one direction, the algorithm went in a different direction. And so now you have an internet comprised of things that are entirely unbelievable. It's the fake internet. It's the doom scroll internet. The great doom scroll that I think most people are talking about today are the Epstein files. This is another thing that, look, I'll say this. I don't think anybody learned anything new from the Epstein files. I think that what's in them is more or less what I expected to be in them. Half the people online right now are saying the Epstein files are just the ramblings of a boomer guy. He's just a boomer guy being a rich, entitled boomer asshole. That's all they are. That's what we knew about Epstein to begin with. Then the other big take from the Epstein files is this exposes the cabal of our globalist leaders who are secretly manipulating the strings behind the scenes. And you can see in all their interactions exactly how they do it. My reaction is quite simply the Office meme. They're the same picture. The globalist leaders that are manipulating the strings and essentially designing the world that we now occupy are just a bunch of cringe boomers that are higher on their own power. That is what they are. That's what Epstein is. That's what Bill Gates is. That is, to a much lesser extent, what Elon Musk even is. All of these global leaders, from the World Economic Forum to the people the people going to Epstein's crazy island, to Noam Chomsky, they're all of these same boomers playing out their cringe boomer ideas, talking way too much, revealing way too much. And inside that, there's this implicit nefariousness to the endeavor. A good example of this is Epstein's description of fractional reserve banking. Fractional reserve banking is an ancient practice, but we're doing it to a level that is kind of unheard of, right? There's fractional reserve banking the way that they did it back in ancient Greece, and then there's fractional reserve banking the way that the Fed does it. Again, the idea generally is that you can get $1 lent to you, and you can manufacture $8, right? So the classic thing that Epstein said is he said, you have assets and liabilities, right? So if I say, you get an asset, you're like, oh, that's good. I got an asset. You have a liability. Oh, you got liability. So let's say I give you a car, and then I take from you an IOU for however much the car costs. I don't know, $30,000, whatever, right? So your debt is your liability, and that's equal to your asset, that is the car, that is a depreciating asset. But banks don't see it that way, right? So let's say banks borrow a bunch of money from you in the form of dollars, right? Well, technically, that's a liability on your part. That's a liability on your part because now, let's say you borrow $100 million from the Federal Reserve. You're a bank. You borrow $100 million from the Federal Reserve, as your right is to do under our current system. That is a liability, is it not? And you better buy an asset with that, should you not? Well, no. The debt is an asset because if you borrow $100 million and you're a bank, then the bank can loan out $800 million, keeping the $100 million as reserve. And so essentially, you can use debt to create assets because now all of a sudden you have $100 million in IOUs that you owe to the Fed. But going out there in the economy are $800 million of IOUs that people owe to you. So you've just manufactured out of nothing $700 million just because it's there, just because the Fed says that's what you can do. That's just because the interest rate is low, you can get away with just manufacturing this. So debt for you is an asset. That's the whole idea of fractional reserve. Does that sound nefarious? Does that sound unfair? Why are you going around? Let me ask you this. Tax season is coming up soon. It's February. I'm getting my documents in order. Why are you, every time you go do this, you do your entire household budget so that you can pay a third or a fourth of your money to Uncle Sam, and most of that money is going to service Uncle Sam's debt. But whenever you take out money from the bank, whenever you take out debt, that is a life-destroying decision. If you take out too much debt, bad debt, like Caleb Hammer might say, you're going to go bankrupt and destroy your life. And you'll get called up to Caleb Hammer shows and get lectured on it infinitely. But that's not how the bank sees debt. For the bank, debt is utility. Debt allows them to create more debt to them. So you're running the rat race to pay off debt. Everyone else is using debt to leverage more money to them. And there's this line that Epstein says, this was quoted, I don't know if it was faked by AI. There was a commonly cited quote by someone who said, let the Goyim work in the field while we short shipping interests. That's the way of the world. All of this talk about the dumb people who are working, the dumb people who want to actually put effort into their communities and make things better for the future. What, don't they know you can just sit around and collect on debt, make money from loaning money, so on and so forth? Yeah, that sounds like something that would be like something that I would imagine coming from the protocols of the elders of Zion, or some other anti-Jewish propaganda from the Third Reich or whatever. That's how I would label the sentiment. It is also how every rich boomer thinks. Chosen or Goyim, every rich boomer I have ever met, and among them have been a fair number of purebred wasps from the Mayflower, they all think like this. The people who work in the fields and who get their hands dirty and take actual risks and put their blood into their communities, those people are giant suckers. And the people who are really the masters of the universe are the people that control the knobs of debt sitting behind everything. That's how boomers think. Now, I'm not blind to the fact that the Epstein emails show an insane level of racial animus really directed from Jews to Gentiles, specifically Gentile white people. As always, I have known about this. I'm not so sure I agree with Academic Agent that this is the force that runs the entire world. But I don't know, like this is the storm that we live under. This is the reality of a sizable portion of our ruling class. Probably not all of it, maybe not even most of it. I don't know. It's there. It's there. That's all I know, is it's there. And it exists because of this incredible moment of boomer mendacity. This idea that history has elected you to be the person who gets to borrow on the credit of the old world and spend in the economy of the new world. No work is ever required of you. All you're doing is arbitrage between the old world, where currency did have weight to it, where people did have to earn their money through work, and the new world, where money is just printed out and things are automatically generated, and no one owns anything really, but it just happens. It just happens. And as a boomer, you're the beneficiaries of both worlds, because you get to print the money, but you get to spend it like it's actual money and not funny currency that disappears into the ether. And in the meantime, you're paying way lower taxes, and you're buying up actual physical assets for pennies on the dollar because nobody else is getting money that can afford those assets anymore. You're employing the most desperate workers in the entire world, and you're putting all conceivable assets, including houses and cars, on a market to be purchased by the richest people in the entire world. Who could say no to this? Who could say no to this? The only question is, why don't they care about their descendants? Why don't they care about their posterity? Well, I think in Epstein's case, it's because he doesn't see the posterity of most Western nations as his posterity. He sees them as an inconvenience to be dispensed with. Still, I think that this is still the wrong lesson. What are the actual lessons that should be taken from the Epstein files? I mean, first of all, I think that the idea that work exists in the same space that it does in the old world is silly. There's this reporter, Michael Tracy, who's going around trying to run cover for Epstein, trying to convince me he was just an ordinary guy doing ordinary things. Yeah, he was a school teacher. And this is the crazy thing, right? He was a school teacher who got hired to be essentially to be an assistant earning millions of dollars at an investment for an investor for, I don't know, it was the CEO of an investment firm, I think originally hired him. I mean, again, how many school teachers, how many high school teachers get hired in their middle age into like investment banks, just like that? I mean, did that happen at your school? This was a career trajectory for a lot of high school teachers. Furthermore, what skills did he bring to the table? I mean, okay, I mean, Michael Tracy does have a point. Well, Epstein was good at his job. He was good at his job. What was his job? Well, he was good at moving money around so that people would avoid having to pay taxes on it. He was good at moving favors around so people could be on the right side of market swings. Is this illegal? Well, it should be illegal. Certain forms of this are illegal in the form of insider trading or tax evasion. But as everybody knows, the difference between a good tax tip and insider trading or tax evasion and tax avoidance is a matter of legal opinion. There is no clear line between legal tax avoidance and illegal insider trading. There is no clear line between a sick investment tip and insider trading, and or tax evasion and tax avoidance. I'm getting tired and repeating myself. He skirted the line on a questionably illegal activity, and he moved funds around, and he could do that because he made friends. And he made friends because he did favors, and he did favors because he had money. The lesson from Epstein is oligarchy is self-reinforcing. Oligarchy is self-reinforcing, and the power is in the network. The power is in perception. This is really what we should be learning about social media and about our roles in a post-social media age. Obviously, I'm not retiring from the internet. I hope people haven't been dissuaded from not giving me entropy chats. I mean, checking. No one's giving me any money because, okay, there's a lot of money there. Anyway, or I think there is. Either way, I will look at that later. Anyway, there must be a mistake on that one, but I'll issue a refund if there is. I will continue on with the talk here. Okay. The difference between these things. So here's where I'm getting at. What we should learn from Epstein is networking is everything, and the exchange of favors is everything. Now, when we say networking, we're talking about strong networking. You want a tip, you can go on social media and get a tip about taxes from any old person. But when someone gives you a tax tip, say for instance, an early insight on when a prime minister is going to resign, or an early recording of a meeting of a financial congress, those are risky tips to give you. They're putting their necks on the line. Those are questionably legal or illegal. When you have a bank take a deposit, of millions of dollars with the presumption that they could get hit by a pretty hefty fee or a tax by accepting under the wrong circumstances, and you told them don't worry about that, they're sticking their necks out for you. All of these favors that Epstein received that made him the man he was, the kind of puppet master, simultaneously the cringe boomer and the puppet master in one person, they were all built on a network of relationships with different people that were solid, that were built on trust, that involved risk, aka the exact opposite of the kind of relationships that people ordinarily build online. Nobody would accept an investment tip from Sarah Stock. I'm sorry. You wouldn't accept an investment tip from an e-girl, would you? Certainly not one that you're going to risk $1 million on. You wouldn't risk moving your life savings into an offshore bank run by Milo Yiannopoulos. And I'm mutual with Milo Yiannopoulos. This is crazy. This is the relationships that real elites generate. Firm ones. Potentially ethnic ones. I'm not a Zionist. Much to the chagrin of academic agent, though, I'm not particularly anti-Zionist. I see our interests as not aligned. But I don't want to go out of my way to hurt or kick the hornet's nest that is global Zionist interests. I don't want to piss off the Jewish community just because it's there. I want to protect my own community. I want to protect my own posterity. That's my priority. And I only want to get into a fight with them to the extent that it benefits me. There's one and only one thing that is standing in the way, or not, it's the main point of contention. If you read between the lines, if you look at what's being done and what is really argued over, it's not these bad actors like Epstein. It's not even the Israeli military that's killing tons of people in Gaza under atrocious circumstances. The real battles for our future go on in one question. And that's the question, do Gentile Europeans have a coherent identity that can be expressed and pursued collectively and politically and celebrated as such, the same way that Jewish identity is? The same way that you see implicitly in all of the Epstein emails, the same way that you hear implicitly if you listen to any Jewish public intellectual talk about their own ethnic identity for any amount of time. This should not be a hard thing to grant us from the Jewish point of view. They resist it in most cases. They are terrified of it. But it's the one thing that I continuously have to ask for. We are past the point of individualistic politics. This is no longer going to be a thing. There has to be an identity politics that we can participate in, and that has to be considered equal to the identity politics played by other groups. Otherwise, we will be completely overwhelmed. But where does this come back to us using social media? Well, I will say this. We need to start seeing social media functionally, teleologically. Teleologically, that's the one thing that we didn't ask when we started this process up. When we got on to social media, we never really asked, okay, what is this for? When you pick up your phone next, really put in mind what you want when you put the phone down. What do you want to have been accomplished? What do you want to have been accomplished? Very few people can answer this question. I know what I want to accomplish when I write an essay on Substack or when I do a podcast. Sometimes I want to turn on YouTube and listen to kind of really, not very intellectual content. I don't know, rhetorically defective is one of my favorite kind of lowbrow politics channels. I hope he doesn't hate me for saying that. But sometimes I just want background music, and that's a fun one. Sometimes I want to hear about community building, and I turn on OGC's Chapter House radio. All these things are reasons to turn on, but most of the time I'm doom scrolling. Most of the time I'm having my soul sucked into the algorithm and getting absolutely nothing in exchange for my efforts. It is harrowing. What do we get on the opposite end of these things? Do we have relationships that we're building? I mean, why not spend more time in the group chat with your family? Does everyone have family group chats? I think most people do these days, right? But arguably, those are the most valuable places. Why not create a Facebook environment where you manage the algorithm? That's essentially what a local group chat would be, as long as the people inside it see eye to eye. This is us relearning politics at a base level. I guess, I didn't really have much to leave on, but we're some things are kind of coming down the line for us in 2026. The slopification of the internet is only going to intensify as generative AI spins up. And we're going to kind of have to take a step back and ask ourselves, what do we have to show for our efforts? I'm not exactly sure how we're going to resolve these problems. I think, and my hope is, that the legacy of the internet is going to be a more realistic understanding of politics. These are the positive aspects, obviously. One of the most prominent legacies of the internet is that dating has been completely destroyed, right? I was just watching Brett Cooper, another right-wingy girl. God, I really hope Brett Cooper doesn't go down the same way Sarah Stock did. But I don't know, given the track record, that's like a flip of a coin, right? Flip of a coin for these people. Good Lord. Good Lord. But everyone right now, every time the subject of dating apps comes up, the advice is to get off. I mean, 3 years ago it was, how do we fix dating apps? Nobody is talking about that anymore because there is no way to fix social media apps or social media dating apps, I should say. What was it? Hinge or Bustle? Both Bustle and Hinge or whatever. They both bill themselves as the anti-Tinder. These are the social media dating apps that you get so that you can delete them. You're getting this app so that you can delete the app. That's how they build themselves. They've just become Tinder with more steps involved because the algorithm demands that all social media dating apps become Tinder. So the only alternative is just to get off the apps. Now, look, I can't really give you that advice in good conscience. The reason why I can't give you that advice in good conscience is I met my wife on a social media dating app and it worked out great. Now, some caveats, that social media site was Catholic Match and the relationship we got was not low friction. She was in a different country across an ocean. Every time I wanted to see her, I had to get on a boat or she had to get on a boat. This is not an easy relationship to manage over the course of our time. But it worked. I mean, maybe the friction itself was the reason why it worked. And so I have to say that there is some use of this technology, but it does not work at scale. It does not work at scale. That is obvious right now. And so the only alternative is to essentially Make your primary investment to be the descaled versions of things. Try to find a way to meet people outside of the dating apps. For most people, that has to be the way to do things. It has to be the way that you're managing these situations, because the scaled up version always will tend towards slop and crash out. That is the way of things. And at the end, all you'll be left with is little pieces that you can't really properly sew together anymore. What do we have left that's good? Well, we have a super fast way of communicating with each other via group text. We have a way to distribute content like Substack and YouTube that gets around Hollywood, that is kind of destroying things, that is kind of entropic in a sense. We destroyed Hollywood in the mainstream media. But on the other hand, we have essays that are just as good if you go on Substack. If you read Dudley New Right, we have a better awareness of politics, I would argue, than we did before. And maybe on even a deeper level than crude politics, we have a different understanding of human nature. At least on the right wing, we have a more realistic understanding of human nature. I think in some sense, the left has a harder time doing this because their understanding of politics in their own spheres that are separated from us, all they have are sort of illusions and fantasies about how things should be. We have an understanding about how things actually are. And in the wake of that, a lot of the boomer truth regime illusions are fading away. We can understand what's the stakes. We can understand what we're fighting for. Can we actually come to an understanding of ourselves politically that is collective, that has connection to the spiritual, that can deliver that meaning that, everyone was looking for, like myself looking for meaning in the failing comic book shop, listening to people talk about Alan Moore and Preacher and all that stuff, and Neil Gaiman's Sandman? I think we can grasp towards that. I think we can grasp towards that. I think that the work we're doing here is part of that. But we are very much conducting an archaeological expedition. We are very much looking back upon just the ruins of things and trying to piece together what remains of the internet that was, what can be shielded from corruption of the algorithm. Just whatever you do, do not make your soul rely on social media cloud. Do not try to be the king of cool on the internet. Guard the things that are valuable for you away, that are your spiritual values, and just use the internet as a kind of wilderness to venture forward, to find kindred spirits, to gather together the various people that can be your new collectivity and your new community and your new place that you can actually fight for. All right, guys, that's the end of the lecture portion of this talk. I will now go on to do the entropy chats. Okay, let's do this. Usually I check this. So I am blown away because somebody gave me an insanely large entropy chat. Wow. Okay, so thank you, Jack, for the largest entropy chat I've ever gotten in my entire life. That is a lot. Thank you so much for this. If that is an error, then please contact Entropy and get them to refund that. I will not be heartbroken if you get that refunded and give me a more reasonable super chat. If on the other hand, this is something that you can afford, thank you very much. He says, Jack Volley says, hello, Dave, big fan, nothing more than that, enjoy. Wow, thank you very much. But I'll do the other super chats again. Again, if you want to get a refund, I think you should contact Entropy first. I I guess me, but I really hate transferring money back. It's hard to do that once it hits my account with my real taxable name on it, because then suddenly I'm kind of doxing myself if I have to send it back to you. So please try to work through entropy if that is sent in error, because otherwise I'm taking a risk. Not that I wouldn't refund it to you if you requested it. Thank you guys. I have just not recovered from that flu. I've been exercising more. I've been doing tennis, and still that flu that hit me on the first week of January the bronchitis just has not left me. I can feel it in the lungs. Seneca for $3 USA. Thank you for all that you do. I've been watching since 2020, and your thoughts have really helped me shape my own views on culture and politics. Well, thank you very much, Seneca. That's good to hear. Saffron Park for $15 USA. I often hear people say on the right, love thy enemies includes a public enemy, private enemy distinction. But I've never heard a defense of this. Can you share your thoughts? I don't know about this one. Public enemy, private enemy distinction. Look, I mean, Christians have interpreted love your enemy. Christians have never interpreted the love your enemy injunction from the Bible as being a reason to not defend yourself. I'm not so sure exactly what you mean by public enemy, private enemy distinction, but I assume you mean like a personal enemy versus an enemy of your people. All human beings are people that you should wish the best for in the abstract. And in that Christian sense, you should love them. That does not mean that you cannot hate their actions. That does not mean that you cannot summon up anger against them or fight them in the heat of battle. As a matter of fact, it is my belief that Christians are called, especially Christian men, are called to do that in certain extreme instances. That it, in a sense, is our duty to fight for our collectivities and for our peoples and for the future of our children. And that to not do that is a grave error and a grave sin. Other than that, I'm not so sure if there is a distinction here. I certainly think that you could even call somebody your enemy, and it still would not be an unchristian act. What the love your enemy and pray for your enemy, it's supposed to inspire in you a sense of humility in the face of hatred that could otherwise consume you. I have been struggling with the last 10 years with a lot of people that I feel betrayed me who were former personal friends. These are people that, especially during the fever years of 2017 to 2021, threw me under the bus because I voiced even minor conservative opinions. And I've struggled with trying to forgive them for that. Now, look, I'll give you an example. Let's talk about transgenderism. So, as anyone's noticed, or people who've been following the news have noticed, that in the last week, transgenderism has been suffered a number of setbacks. There was a lawsuit that went through where somebody successfully sued their doctor for incorrect diagnosis for gender dysphoria and the recommended surgeries and drugs, specifically the use of the threat of suicide to compel parents and other professionals to give their assent when it ordinarily would not have been given. And this was groundbreaking because it's, to my knowledge, the first one of these detransitioner suits that have been successful. And immediately after that, a variety of medical organizations that were notably conservative reversed their position on transgenderism, now weighing against it. This could cause a cascade effect that could completely upend the transgender industrial complex. It is right to hate the evil that was done in the name of this movement. But we must always keep in mind that we can only punish people where the greater good requires punishment, where either a crime has been committed and we have to carry out the demands of temporal justice here, or political vengeance is needed for the purposes of teaching future generations to not make the same mistake. The law is a teacher, and the law needs to be modified and in some sense used in an extraordinary fashion, it is my belief, to create those teachable moments. Beyond that, we cannot come to this conflict with a heart of vengeance. We have to extend a hand to friendship to those people, even those people who mistreated us, who were sincerely wrong in the past and who want to have repentance. That is, I think, the essence of love your enemy. Thank you, Saffron Park. John Steetman for $25 USA. We have not yet reached peak woke. Well, contravening my previous statement. Whether in 28 or 32, the left will gain power again, and they will be hell to pay. They will use hard power to wreak their vengeance upon the chud, and every minute wasted pretending we won when DHS posts an Argatha edit and not building to survive the denazification of America is deadly. Well, I agree with that, Jonathan Steetman. The left is going to get at least one more turn back at the helm of power. And they will try to use hard power. The problem is the left is very, very bad at using hard power. They have a mostly female base at this point, and women are very bad at using hard power, especially against people who are close to them, especially in places where there could be blowback. And so their vengeance, their wreaking havoc upon the chuds, as you put it, that might not go as well as they had initially planned based on the position we are in, based on what they are. And because of that, I think that we have a damn good chance of writing it out. But that being said, we have to use this time to organize more effectively. I can't plug these organizations enough, but people should be looking into basket weaving, especially if you're in Europe or Canada. And people should be looking into the OGC or the Exit Group or New Founding if you're in America. Any of these organizations I can vouch for. Even, I wrote a big article on the Redwood Society's blog with all of the links I have to the people that are doing cool projects. So, look, if you're not working to get a group of your friends together that is aligned, or meeting up with other groups that are aligned, you are doing a disservice to yourself. You're leaving yourself vulnerable. And I think that everyone should be looking to do that. And, it never hurts to take the first step. And it'll probably help you in your other endeavors too. Nobody's going to get canceled for joining group chats. You're not going to get canceled for meeting up with people for beer or for attending a talk. All of those risks are in the past. And if this disaster rolls around like people are saying it is, you'll be glad you did. Tonic water for $3 USA. How would you suggest those of us free market reactionaries, a la Jeremy Kauffman, organize? I am more aligned to NRX, but not enough to mingle. Also, how to best reach out to you. Trying to build an org. Well, the best place to reach out to me is on Twitter DMs. I think they're open. I haven't checked my spam box for a very long time, but that's usually a good place. I am very much behind on my messages. If you build an org, I will host a link to it on the Redwood Society blog. I am trying to get a podcast started that's focused specifically on community building. That's focused specifically on getting people to work together and highlighting people who are working in that area. We recently had on Johann Kurtz, the author of Founding a Legacy, which was a very, very great book. And we're hoping to get more people on. I have a list, but I've been so busy that I haven't been able to put it together. Thank you. Bug Sab for $5. As a Zoomer, the only time I've heard a song by the Decemberists was when my millennial coworker put on his, quote, I Hate Kids playlist and played a song called The Rake Song by the Decemberists. Yeah, I really prefer the Decemberists' early work. There's stuff that's more like sea shanties mixed with indie rock. But I'm going to do an article where I write a few paragraphs on them and their appeal. So that will be on my Substack if you want to learn more about that period and my own kind of interaction with it in Portland or Seattle earlier. So will Alkalite for $3 USA. Hi, Dave. I'm in software and I've been unemployed for 8 months. I get interviews, but usually get ghosted. It's difficult even to get a job stocking shelves. Any advice would be appreciated. Cheers. Um, I would look. I would get a job doing anything. There are a lot of jobs in just service areas, and I would kind of I would I might get your look. I mean, if I don't know your specific skill set, but software resumes need to be massively rewritten in the current era. If you look at my resume, it's like a list of languages that I know how to code in. Nobody cares about that anymore in the era of generative AI. They care about development experience. They care about people knowing how to plan things out. The language stuff is sort of a thing that's not used anymore. So I would get someone to redesign your resume, emphasize personal skills, and then also be open-minded to career changes. I know that there is some to be a lot of demand in sort of heel industries, and don't be bashful for changing your career. Your software skills are an asset, but I think that a resume and a cover letter has to emphasize sort of unique qualities that are going to matter in an era where, Claude exists for coding tasks. And I think that's going to be, that again, I can't give you job search tips in that regard, but I think we really have to start seeing jobs as just things that you move in and out of over a lifetime as opportunity presents itself. Don't get locked into a commitment to anything. And always remember that people skills and relationships matter more than jamming your resume on, LinkedIn or whatever. The age of LinkedIn, I think, is over. The Asian striver mindset has almost destroyed it. So do everything in your power to not sound like an Asian striver and be open to jobs that they probably wouldn't consider. Again, Jack Foley, for that very, very generous super chat. I'm very grateful. Saffron Park for $15 USA. It seems from its use of history that Sacred Heart devotion has some particular relevance to the counter-revolutionary movements. I almost misread that. Have you any insights into this? Um, well, I mean, I certainly know that I always thought it was more the St. Michael's prayer, but the Sacred Heart devotion, I've heard the early 20th century counter-revolutionary movements have used that to good effect. Look, I think that if you can get a group of men that are young men praying together and doing things in the real world together, and you respect those men's competence and their loyalty, you have the beginning of something that is very special. One of the big problems in the OGC is distance and also lack of unified religious vision. Now, eventually, we'll be able to overcome this as we scale up, hopefully. But the problem is that, well, the opportunity is here that if you can find a way to unify people around you in your community in common prayer for a common purpose, I think that that would be something that would be not only beautiful and holy and worth pursuing, they would also very likely bear fruits in the secondary good of effectiveness with effective community building and effective politics. That is. Thank you very much. Society Man for $15 says, if you've had a chance, I recommend checking out the Korean film No Other Choice. I'll give that recommendation to my wife. Oh, Society Man, I think you met my wife at the latest, at the Oregon event. I keep on telling the Oregon guys at Cascadia Frontier that they need to get a name for their event that isn't the Oregon event. It's like the White Album. I mean, come on. Like, it's the event that is in Oregon. Like, these things need to have more creative names and more creative imagery, Make it a little exciting. Make it a little sexy. I don't know. But nice seeing you again. Check out the Korean film No Other Choice, rare contemporary film that felt like it was squarely anchored in the present without any of the trappings of progressive mind rot. Hollywood may be cooked, but I'm hoping that foreign films can pick up the slack. Indeed. Indeed. The foreign films, I've been hopeful about that. Thanks again for the super chat. Queef Chief. Okay, wow. That is a spicy name, Queef Chief. The image. Enjoy show. Can't watch it live. Minnesota resident. Sorry if off topic, but reading Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, considering counter agitation using similar rules. Dress as clowns, mocking pantomime, get in agitators' faces, honking horns as they interfere with ICE, hyper non-violent, hyper agitation, pataphysical resistance. Okay, look, Queef Chief, that's a great idea, except this is essentially the playbook for the alt-right in 2017. So what you're saying is let's use Alinsky's rules for radicals, but in the reverse. Now, there are a few Alinsky's rules for radicals that are quite effective, that are quite good for reactionaries. However, most of them are useless. And the reason why most of them are useless is that if you go up to a protest and you try to like clown on them, the reaction of the protesters from the left is always going to be to escalate the violence. It will always be to escalate against you. They'll escalate it and escalate it and escalate it until it leads to a violent confrontation, and their friends will make sure that that violent confrontation resolves and you feeling the full force of the law and them not getting charged at all. So, challenging someone to a protest off, what you're really doing is you're getting into a giant game of chicken where with the legal system. Because look, I'm going to be blunt, guys. Protests are effectively illegal. I mean, we have the right to protests in the form of organized parades. But anytime protests interact with law enforcement or with traffic regulations, or even with scheduling, if it's not a scheduled protest, that is an illegal protest. Now, civil rights in America has convinced the entire left that illegal protests are legal for the left because our legal system has said that illegal protesting is legal if you're a leftist. The same has not been true for the right wing. With the right wing, as soon as your little protest crosses the rails and does anything illegal, you're going to get arrested. Like Patriot Front, like the original 2017 alt-right. If you're in a liberal area, you will get arrested. And if they can plausibly connect your activism to a death somewhere, you're in serious risk of ruining your life. And so I can't in good conscience recommend reversing Alinsky's rules for radicals. Unless it has to do with his advice for organizing, that is good advice. But insofar as like these fun clown protests inside a jurisdiction that leans progressive, you're playing Russian roulette, and I can't in good conscience recommend that. Echomancer for USA $25. February 2016 is also the month I married my wife. 10 years flew away really fast. My fourth kid was born last week. Happy to have you as a parasocial relationship while I age and become more right-wing. Replugging that video game, Outer Wilds again, as I nerdily think it has real meaning. Play it with wife on her channel. Outer Wilds. Oh, maybe I can get... We just have had so little time. It's my 10-year anniversary with my wife since we met. We've only been married for 7.5 years. But thank you so much, and congratulations on your fourth child. Congratulations. Maybe I should be giving you a super chat. Cool guy for $5. I think burnout and boredom is the cause of these dissident right meltdowns. How to avoid this in the future? Look, the way you approach contrarianism is just ask them, okay, sure, you're no longer a right winger. Now what? Now what? I'm not interested in hearing complaints about right wingers. It's boring. It's just boring. unless it's an actual ideological disagreement, I don't care that you could find somebody who's cringe out there. I don't like Milo Yiannopoulos. I think he's cringe. I don't find it useful though to like debunk him or anything like that. Uh, all right. How to avoid this in the future? Well, I mean, I think boredom. I think people are mistaking boredom for the death of social media. I have no lack of things to write about these days. It's a target-rich environment for things to write about. The problem is just there's this impression that it all goes on to this ether that is the internet and never results in anything that is life-giving or productive or hopeful. And that is, if you can find a way to connect a hopeful story in the real life to an ideology online, you will have created the artistic demonstration of the entire year. If you can take the next step and go beyond meetups and fraternal societies and start talking about actual victories that you have in the real world, getting actual wins with people on the ground and aligning them to kind of a new way of seeing things, that would be an amazing, amazing piece of art. And I don't know, an amazing, let's borrow a word from the Jewish faith, an amazing mitzvah. I wish there was a Christian word for good deed. There really isn't. There's just not bad deeds in Christianity. There are virtues you can cultivate, but there's nothing where you can pat yourself on the back and say you did the right thing, because perfection is commanded. So anyway, thank you, cool guy. Jason McGinty for $5 USA. Alex and Fisto, I think that's the Black Ibis Social Club, if I'm not mistaken. Alex and Fisto were just talking about this exact topic on social media on their stream tonight. Serendipity. Well, that's probably because we both read the same article that I think it's like Riffs in Stone or something wrote an article by the same name. That's where I copied that slide from. I probably should have mentioned him on the stream. Well, I guess I just did. But I mean, on the lecture portion proper. But yeah, it's just what's going on, right? We're talking about what's going on. The Hangman for $5 says the wheat fields. This is a reference to the excellent subversive and highly offensive cartoon Murdoch, where one of the main characters lusts after Lauren Southern and is constantly disappointed when she turns out not to be the virginal blonde in the wheat fields. But I don't know. Look, guys, for Sarah Stock, I do pray that she repents. But and I do pray that she patches up her marriage. I can't follow her seriously as a personality anymore. She's caused everyone so much humiliation with this that I don't know. The juice is not worth the squeeze on female influencers anymore. They instantly create more damage than the benefit that they put into the scene. I don't know how to. It's like with Alex Xitter, right? Her utility was that she elevated the discourse and made it something that could run in the New York Times. Well, an Alex Xitter podcast did run in the New York Times, but it was the one where she was putting people down and denouncing the right wing generally. That's more damage than, I mean, I don't need these people for the views. We have people who are what doesn't Aaron McIntyre have a larger following than Sarah Stock does? Certainly Ho Math does. We don't need female influencers to get clicks. And most people who are clicking on her just are clicking on her because she's pretty, which means that they're useless for the broader purposes of organization. So I don't know. The wheat fields, yes, send up enough, but also pray for Sarah Stock. I really hope she repents and saves her marriage. And maybe she can have a career doing fashion, like trad fashion. That's great. Just like stay out of politics and do create safe, do a bunch of have kids and then do a mommy blog. That would be like the perfect comeback for Sarah Stock. Just, come clean about your past, repent, and then do a mommy blog where you do advice. That would be perfect. Cool guy for $5. To give AA massive credit, his popularization of the term sloppulism is one of the best things to happen to the DR and general discourse. Yeah, he's good at coming up with terms. He was the originator of the boomer truth regime. So there's that, right? There's another example. I don't know. There's another really good word he came up with that's kind of blank. I'm blanking on it right now, but the sloppulism is one. I mean, he wrote the Populist Delusion, certainly. So there's that. Spartan Geo62 for $5. As another e-girl bites the dust, we must question why women taking our beliefs doesn't save them. Well, but this is an easy question, Spartan. I mean, it does save them. I mean, look, the numbers are in. If women follow traditional sexual ethics, they tend to get better results. I mean, like nothing's guaranteed in life, and there's always the woman who can do what Pearl Davis says. And what does Pearl Davis says? He's like the optimal play for the e-girl is to use as much of your 20s for yourself and then stick the landing right before you turn 30. You could pull that off, but on average, for the most part, the best path for women are to follow traditional ethics when it comes to managing your social relations, your political ideology, your sexual ethics, to put a quite fine point on it. So, I mean, look, if you follow the ethics, it's like, okay, I mean, this is the whole problem. It's like the guy who says, well, your exercise, if you sold this exercise routine to these people and they didn't lose weight, then you've really got to question your exercise routine. And you look at the guys, and the guys just bought the videos, but they didn't actually do it. Well, look, I mean, the ideology, it depends on you actually doing the thing to get the benefit. that's and it's not anything like extraordinary. Nothing we've talked about on this channel has been like go join a nunnery. Although, for some people that might be a good idea, Lauren Southern. But I mean, she has a kid, so she can't. But no one's like join a nunnery. No one's like do this sort of lifestyle BDSM thing where you're a trad wife the way that Ballerina Farms is. No one's saying that. People are just saying be normal by the standards of your grandparents. Just be normal. But you actually have to be normal. And I'm sorry, but what Sarah Stock did and confessed to having done was not normal. So I can't really, I'm sorry, it behooves us to be humble, but that's just like, oh, your exercise didn't work, but your exercise routine didn't work because I didn't do it. That's just stupid. Spartan Geo62 says, I agree that there needs to be an international right-wing cooperation, but the Greenland issue wounded that idea. Also, people that are downplaying Epstein, the Epstein network, and the Epstein country are another wound. Well, okay, look, I really lament how Trump handled Canada and Europe. What Trump needed to do is adopt right-wing parties in Canada and Europe and make them his own, and then work tirelessly to get them elected and to get the existing government out of there. Not to make power plays with Canada or do anything like that, but to literally take control of these countries and build new regimes like the new regime was in America. And he didn't do that. Look, I don't know what you mean by downplaying the Epstein files. Was what I said here, was that downplaying the Epstein files? I don't know what that even means. Okay, like he was an incredibly cruel man who was very indicative of how our ruling class thinks. That is what he was. And what more do you want me to say about it, right? That's apparently what Epstein was. And what conversation comes after this, right? The Epstein files have been released for half a week now. And I've heard tons of people complain about people downplaying the Epstein files, but I haven't had anyone tell me what I should really be doing about it, which is sort of the missing part of this conversation. Ben White, welcome. Do you think Trump's limited response to the unrest in Minneapolis is because he's unable or unwilling to do it. It feels like democracies beget only foxes, not lions. Well, that's just true. I would say that our leaders are uncomfortable with using explicit force, but we all know they use force on a right-wing riot. Yes and no. Our leaders don't use force because this opens up a whole can of worms. And the thing is that using hard force against, so Trump has the only thing we've ever seen is the consolidated deep state cathedral versus various right-wing coalitions. Now, the right-wing cathedral doesn't use force because it doesn't know how to use force, unless you look like a Nazi or a foreigner, and then it can use force against you. The right wing does not, or right-wing aligned governments don't use force for an entirely different reason. The reason why right-wing governments don't use force is that their power is not consolidated in a regime, but is fundamentally coalitional. Right-wing regimes only work when all of their various power brokers are all on board. And once people start jumping ship and defecting, like you saw in the first 100 days of the Trump administration, their ability to act firmly immediately degrades. And that is because if Trump just rolled tanks into Minneapolis, his coalition would fracture again. And then his ability to use force in the future would decrease and decrease and decrease until the Democrats would be able to take him apart in pieces. You need to be able to get rid of the deep state first and create a new deep state before you're even able to do any lion things. Otherwise, the only thing that will happen is like a failed coup. Jack Foley for $3 USA. Not a mistake. Please don't refund. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you very much. That is very generous, Jack. Wow, that beat my goals for the month. Ben White for $3 USA. Another instance of blonde white conservative influencer woman getting into scandals. Conservative media seems unable to learn their lessons. No e-girls ever. Well, look, I can't say that because I love Aiden Paladin. I love Poe the person. I will say this. All female influencers, I either want to be friends with their husband or I want my wife to be more of a friend to them than I am. I have never spoken to Aiden Paladin in my recollection, and I think my wife's spoken to her twice. And for Poe the person, my wife's spoken to her like on 4 occasions, and I don't think I've ever spoken to her other than in DMs to commission art and stuff like that. But anyway, yes, Ben White, that is, I would say no e-girls ever, but that depends on your definition of an e-girl. I really don't want girls leading up the vanguard of the political movement in debates. I think this has been a disaster. Unless they're married to somebody who's more prominent than them, it's always been a disaster. So I don't know, maybe that gets Rachel Wilson off the hook. But I don't know about that. I do like Schoenhead, even though she blocked me. Full disclosure, I'm mutuals with her husband. So maybe that mitigates it. I don't know, but thank you. Ryan G for $50 says, I think you mentioned in a previous stream that you thought David Foster Wallace was the last great novelist. Care to expand on that? Well, I hate to say this for such a generous super chat, Ryan, but all I mean is that he played the role of a novelist. When you look at modern novelists, the modern white male novelists of the millennial generation, they're all either writing historical fiction or they're older, like Jonathan Franzen. I think Jonathan Franzen's an older generation Xer, or they're like they're shitlibs, and they just toe the progressive line because, as Jacob Savage outlined in his article before his very viral article this year, the publishing industry has been closed to straight male millennials. So when I say David Foster was the last great novelist, all I really mean is that he was the last prominent novelist. Insofar as that in David Foster Wallace, you have blue fingers. That's what you get for holding a pen like this and shaking it. In David Foster Wallace, we have one of the last figures that is both seeing the world as it is and making kind of a commentary on our cultural moment, rather than trying to repost off ideology or talk about a historical moment in the past tense. And in order to be a real novelist of prominence, you need to be able to interact with your present culture and in many ways call out some larger theme inside of it. My voice. I've got to get a pencil so that I don't, get blue. I look like I'm an Iraqi that just voted, right? I voted in the Iraqi election. I have the blue fingertip. Anyway, yeah, I got to get a pencil so that I can shake it when I do this and not get ink all over my finger. Let's see. Ben White for $3 USA. I kind of missed the earlier days of Facebook around 2010. Oh boy, do I. I loved Facebook in 2010. It was great. You could get your old friends and your new friends together, and it was just amazing utility. You were mostly just communicating with friends, and it seemed like the biggest villain to the conservative movement was Paul Krugman. Oh yeah, well, Paul Krugman is still a total tool, but no one takes him seriously after he mispredicted hyperinflation. Something that he said would never be able to happen in the modern world. There's no way you can have stagflation. That's what Keynesian theory predicts. Whatever, right? Those were the days. Those were the days. No inflation and Paul Krugman being your main villain. But now we do have stagflation, and Paul Krugman is a fool. I'm not so sure that I'm much better for that exchange. He was proven wrong, but at what cost? Berlero 393. Will those who the Romans called Judeans ever forgive us for unabashedly and proudly celebrating our legitimate European and post-European identities existing in the world today on the same terms that they celebrate being themselves? Really? Well, I mean, they're going to have to get. Look. I would like to get them on board with this, but they're just going to have to get used to this, because identity politics is the name of the game from here on out, and I'm not going to look on them celebrating their own nationalism and then be bashful about my own nationalist feelings or my own desires to see my posterity thrive. Or pretend that I have some obligation to abstract universalism that involves me sacrificing my children and my descendants and people who depend on me. It's not a Christian act to sacrifice your children for your unrealized ideals. Mississippi for $10 USA. As you say, we must be allowed a collective identity and a political expression. The Zios are the main hurdle that prevents this. Thus, logically collaborating with them is at best a dead end, and at worst, feeding our destruction. How seriously one takes this is the source of most of our infighting. Okay, but I don't agree with this. The Zionists, or the people who are for Jewish nationalism, same thing, they are pursuing their interests. Sometimes our interests will overlap. It is not sufficient to just be against them. Like, that's not the end of the conversation. And it behooves us not to go around kicking hornets' nests unnecessarily. This is not a proper and responsible use of political energy. Look, for instance, the most likely outcome of the Gaza war is that Israel will successfully ethnically cleanse Gaza. Now, look, if the choice is resettling Gazans in Egypt, which is what the Zionists will want, versus letting them be refugees in Western countries, I'm going to give the Zionists what they want and let them resettle Gazans in Egypt. That's probably the best thing for all parties concerned. It's the best thing for us. It's the best thing for the Israelis, and it's probably even the best thing for the Gazans who are ethnically cleansed. And look, my father and my grandmother were ethnically cleansed. It happens. I do not want to excuse the atrocities committed by the Jewish state in Gaza at all, but I'm saying that when it comes to choosing the least bad option, I'm not just picking the thing that the Zionists want the least. That's not how I do my decision making. Cool guy for $4. Boomer truth regime, more like the Silent Gen truth regime, Or maybe the degenerate 19th century truth regime. Yeah, but that doesn't have a ring to it. The silent gen truth regime, the greatest generation truth regime. Was it the greatest truth regime? That just sounds awesome. Look, I mean, it's the boomer truth regime, even though most people who are now pursuing it are Generation X. And most of the people that really developed it in the form that we know now were either greatest generation people or silent gens. Okay, thank you. Xander P for $10 USA. I'm in a mid-level leadership role with a woman as my boss and all women under me. Multiple callouts every week, health requirements, and the boss keeps stealing my girl for another department. Advice? Well, I'm not so sure I can mitigate inner office politics. I don't know what the rules are. Just look, don't take drama bait. Just be the no drama guy. You will never win against women in drama. It's just like never engage in a land war with Asia. Never engage in contests of with a woman when drama is on the line. Just be the place where everyone knows no drama will occur, and then just never let anything get to you. That's how you survive in a female workspace. Complete stoicism. I'm not saying that's a great situation. Masculine workspaces are more effective, but you don't control that because you're not her boss. So in the meantime, stoicism is the only answer. And I hate to say that it is, but it is. Sam153 for $20 USA. Evening, Dave. I didn't think AA is crashing out. He's more disappointed in the behavior of the distant people who constantly clinch the Felford Again award on issue after issue. Well, really only one issue in Academic Agent's case, which is Zionism. They'll cheer bad policies and causes just to feel like a win while selling out their integrity. My 2 cents. Okay, great. But like, how do you know that they're cheering on bad? That's like a very uncharitable reading, right? And I'm not saying you're necessarily wrong, but how do I know that? I don't know. I don't know. I want to manufacture controversy, but I know that RN McIntyre has been much more gung ho on the Minneapolis engagement, and most Europeans have not. Now, look, does RN McIntyre cheering that on because he thinks that it's a good idea for Trump to do, sincerely, or is he just trying to get a win? Well, in RN's case, I would say, because I know RN, that he sincerely believes that. So a lot of this is just like disagreeing with people and then coming up with a story about how they're all dishonest slot merchants that don't genuinely believe what they say. I mean, if you disagree on the policy in Minneapolis, sit down and have a debate. Don't do this whole your opinion is slop thing. That reminds me of what people like Nathan Kaufness and non-Zionism used to say. Ben White for $5 USA. I remember your comments about John Doyle a few years back, and I disagreed with you at the time because I liked a lot of his older videos. However, now that he's gotten a show with The Blaze, I found his videos are harder and harder to watch. Look, again, I like John Doyle. John Doyle spoke at one of the OGC conferences, and he gave a great speech. I thought his speech was magnificent. I did not have enough kind words for his speech. I understand that when people join platforms like The Blaze, their material often feels a lot less organic than it did when it was purely an online phenomenon. But I don't know. I think that John Doyle has a lot of good stuff in him. I think that he should focus more on writing. I find the kind of quick talking thing, like the quick talking pundit personality he had, it was always kind of modeled on Ben Shapiro, and I never liked it. It was very Daily Wire coded. And I think that we're really past the quick talking take seller. And I think he needs a rebrand on his image. And I think that he needs to establish himself more on Substack. And I think that he would be great because I think that kid has some promise still in him. So I am not writing off John Doyle at all. I know he's got a beef with is he one of the people that Academic Agent is beefing with? He certainly is one of the people that Nick Fuentes is beefing with. Ben White for $3 USA. On the other hand, I'm actually liking some of the stuff that Nick Fuentes has put out recently. I think he's got a sense about how things work, and many of his takes are very well thought out. Nick is another very bright guy. There is one huge problem I have with Nick, and it's not something that he can't fix, but his history over the last 10 years has been a series of broken relationships and people that have gone down in flames while his brand has risen like a golden star. I do not like leaders that have that track record. I much prefer leaders that feel like Carl Benjamin. Carl Benjamin, everybody he touches, from Arch Warhammer to V, I mean, you can like these people or dislike them, to the Lotus Eaters, all the people he works with, they all seem to go on to succeed. Where all the people that Nick Fuentes works with go on to fail or get off the internet. Uh, for me, that is I like leaders who have people around them who also win. And that is who I always look to for a leader. And that's also what I aspire to be as a leader. I'm not much of a leader. I just do local stuff. But when people look back onto me, my minor role as a leader in this whole thing, what I want them to say is everybody around Dave also won. Like he was an amazing character in that it just seemed like there was kind of an aura around him where good things happened. And unlike Carl's like the eternal optimist. I'm the eternal pessimist. So I don't have that jovial personality, the Falstaffian kind of, Welsh. I always associate it with the Welsh for some reason. I don't have that kind of Falstaffian, jolly personality the way that Carl does. So maybe I'll never be that person. But, that's why I always look for it. And so Nick Fuentes is brilliant in a lot of ways, but I've always considered that a red flag about him. And maybe he'll change. Maybe 2026 is when there will be other gripers that win at the side of Nick Fuentes. So that when you think of gripers, you just don't think of Nick Fuentes as the one head on the army of this anonymous troll army. And it's more like Carl, where when you think of Lotus Eaters, you think of lots of people. It even gets to the point where, like with Connor Tomlinson, where now most of the people I think of when I think of Lotus Eaters are people that are no longer with the Lotus Eaters, that are now independently succeeding in their own right. That's why I look. And actually, Academic Agent had that. In the Academic Agent circle, everyone around Academic Agent also succeeded. So there's that to be said. Ben White, I have a soft spot for pre-2018 Facebook. I joined a Christian discussion and fun posting group, and it's where I became convinced of Catholicism. I think the Facebook groups were actually a pretty good platform to have debates over issues. So I deleted my Facebook in 2017 when multiple people unfriended me due to political disagreements. And I realized I was losing more friends. But Facebook was, especially Christian Facebook was good right up until 2018, right when you're saying. Yeah, that was pretty much the last year that Facebook was at all usable. I still use Facebook for like selling stuff, right? Like Facebook Marketplace is good, right? Ben White for $3 USA. Funnily enough, that group eventually fell apart because of a disagreement between Catholic moderates and Orthodox moderates. Heimbach was in that group too. Oh well, it was fun while it lasted. So my Catholic groups on Facebook started falling apart after the Trump election, where there was a faction of never Trumpers and a faction of MAGA people. And once the boomers started disowning each other, the warm, fuzzy, cozy feeling of Facebook immediately became horrific. And, that was it was atrocious. It was terrible. And once Facebook stopped being cozy, it was like, okay, so it's like less efficient boomer Twitter. And then there's just no reason to be on there until Facebook Marketplace became a thing. Ben White for $5 USA. What do you think will happen to the progressive women when their faith in the inevitable progress of history crumbles? I've had shitlib Caths in my life not speak to me ever again after I challenge certain core liberal beliefs with the church teachings. Well, they'll probably kind of find their own religious group chats and probably like progressive religious group chats and stay in there. some of them will defect and try to find a way back to moderate conservatism, and that might become increasingly popular as the as sort of leftism itself becomes more third worldized, as I should say. But that being the case, that is the end of the super chats. Now go on to reading the Psalm of the day, Psalm 63. So thank you very much for joining me. This is Psalm 63. O God, thou art my God. Early will I seek thee. My soul thirsteth of thee. My flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, to see thy power and thy glory, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. Because thy lovingness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee. Thus I will bless thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips. When I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee in night watches, because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings I will rejoice. My soul followeth hard after thee, thy right hand upholdeth. But those that seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. They shall fall by the sword, they shall be the portion for the foxes. But the king still shall rejoice in God. Every one that sweareth by him shall glory, but the mouth of them that speaketh lies shall be stopped. Well, guys, thank you very much for joining me for Fiddler's Green number 70, Fragments. Have a wonderful